Hey listeners, this is your host, Cosmic Wand. Thank you so much for being here. You can check other videos too. Now let's get on to the video. There was a wry, said stone dais in the center of the lowered floor, and upon the dais stood a stone archway that looked so ancient, cracked, and crumbling that Harry was amazed that the thing was still standing, unsupported by any surrounding wall. The archway was hung with a tattered black curtain or veil which, despite the stillness of the cold surrounding air, was fluttering very slightly as though it had just been touched. He had the strangest feeling that there was someone standing right behind the veil on the other side of the archway. He edged around the dais, but there was nobody there. He did not move. He had just heard something. There were faint whispering, murmuring voices coming from the other side of the veil. Chapter 34, The Department of Mysteries, UTP. It was a victorious procession went in secret to the Ministry of Magic on the eve of the summer of 1996. Finally, Lord Voldemort, the darkest wizard Britain had seen in 6 centuries, had finally succeeded in his goal of the past 14 years. He had captured the boy who lived. Stroking his wand in delight, his snake Nagini wrapped around his shoulders, Voldemort turned his cold red eyes onto the smallest, and youngest, person there. Standing amongst such tall, burly men who were all dressed in black with expressionless masks hiding their faces, Harry Potter looked small and meek, almost pathetic, as he walked tumbled and limped was more like it held in the Death Eater's grasps. At 15 years of age, he was small and slight, his wild black hair matted with blood, which ran from a cut on his hairline and crusted along his face. Beneath sweat-slick bangs, pained emerald eyes still managed to glare hatefully at him, effectively chasing away the agony he was clearly in. Voldemort felt a vindictive smile spread across his face. Pleased to have caused such physical and mental pain. He had tortured Potter, had made him scream until he couldn't even speak. Blood, both dried and wet, stained his ripped CL. Oozing from the deep gashes etched into his torso, his right leg was stiff and painful from another cut in his thigh, and he was sure Potter's body ached from the Cruciatus curses that had been set upon him. Silently, the dark company made its way through the large, spacious rooms and halls of the Ministry, down through the dark corridors and finally into the Department of Mysteries. Emotional ago, NY the Dark Lord himself would never hope to cause. It was in this room that the boy had lost Sirius Black through the archway, which, as far as Voldemort knew, was a way directly into the afterlife. Of course he would never try to discover whether that was true or not, and he's certainly not going to step through himself. Nobody had ever come back through the archway, so they must have gone somewhere permanently. Voldemort liked to think it was a link to heck. It caused him so much pleasure to think of souls screaming in pain as they burned in the lake of everlasting sulfur eternally. Sure enough, as soon as Potter's eyes fell upon the stone archway, his eyes became shadowed with grief, looking at the thing that had led to his beloved godfather's death. There was, also, a hint of understanding there as well. And the Dark Lord realized that the boy knew what was going to happen. He could see fear swimming in those emerald eyes, exhaustion, pain, but there was also acceptance. Potter wanted to die. Voldemort had broken his will to live. When finally all of the Death Eaters were gathered around, Voldemort stepped forward, where Potter stood before the archway, so small, so utterly helpless, and smiled. Potter flinched ever so slightly, fearing that smile, disgusted by it. To Harry, it made Voldemort's face so inhuman, so twisted and horrid, truly the stuff of nightmares. Was there even anything remotely human left in the snake-like creature standing before him? Did it even truly matter? As you can see, Potter, the Dark Lord said now, and he began to circle the boy slowly, as if sizing him up. Harry watched him warily, fearful that Voldemort may do something else to his already torn body. I have brought you here to make a choice. A choice. His voice was low and raspy, almost unrecognizable. From misuse and screaming, still wary, almost sarcastic. There was never any choice in Voldemort's propositions. It was either one thing, or nothing at all. You did not simply say, no, to the Dark Lord Voldemort. Ever. Of course, Potter. A choice. He chuckled, sending a shiver of fear down the young wizard's spine, and then abruptly became serious again. Deadly so. A choice of deaths. You see this archway. I say to you that either you walk through it on your own violation, or I defeat you myself in less, quick, means. He watched Potter flinch again, trembling at the thought of more hurt. He smiled again. "So, Potter, which will it be?" Harry looked up in Voldemort's red eyes and knew the win-win scenario in the Dark Lord's favor. Whatever he chose, it would end in a victory for the Death Eaters. Wizarding Britain would not win. He could only hope that the Order of the Phoenix would give Voldemort more of a struggle than he thought they would be able to. He wouldn't be here to help. He hung his head, thinking about Ron and Hermione, the Weasleys, Hogwarts, all the places he knew and loved, the people who he was sure were mourning him, believing he was already dead. It hurt to remember them, knowing they would never know what had happened to him besides the fact that he had been captured. But he couldn't be too upset, thinking that if this archway was a path to death, then he would at least be with his parents and with Sirius again. Would that be such a bad thing? He shut his eyes briefly, then swallowed hard. Looked up at Voldemort. "I'll walk," he whispered softly, so quietly that he could be barely heard. Voldemort smiled again. "Good," he hissed. He stepped aside so that Harry saw the archway. "Go on, Potter. Be with your mudblood mother and your wretched mud of a godfather." The walk to the archway seemed to take forever. Harry could feel the Death Eater's eyes upon him, his footsteps echoing eerily in the silence. He thought he could feel a cold draft caressing his face as he walked up to it and could hear the voices whispering. Without hesitation, he stepped through. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts. William Shakespeare. Everything seemed to pass in a whir. Somehow, impossibly, Harry felt a jerk very similar to a portkey draw him forward. Everything seemed to be blurred, he seemed to be spinning into nothing, until finally he realized he was in fact passing through what seemed to be images and moments in but in a life and universe he did not recognize. He saw strange peoples, all aliens, some with horns, others with extensions growing from their heads, others human. Some fired guns, others held STAFF-like weapons, and others fought with swords that shone with energy. He saw glimpses of wars, of times of peace. Planets burned, were rebuilt, collapsed, and new were created. Cry out or make a sound, before finally falling into a dim light that seemed fuzzy and unclear. He felt more than heard the impact of the ground. His hearing seemed to have been jumbled by whatever he had passed through. The breath left his body in a jolt, and he couldn't even scream as the pain of his wounds flared, shooting along his bones, as his lungs seized in his chest. For a long moment, he couldn't do anything but lay there in a senseless shock, feeling his heart flying in his throat but unable to do anything. Finally, though, he fought through the agony of his body and thrust it aside. This couldn't possible. Why be the afterlife? He didn't think it would be this painful, and besides, he didn't feel dead. Where was he? Gasping, panting for air, he struggled weakly up on his hands and knees, looking around. Even if his head was still pounding and his ears were ringing. He seemed to be in a run-down hovel lit by dirty sunlight shining through shattered windows, deserted by everyone and everything. Gathering his waning strength, wondering what he had gotten himself into, he dragged himself up on shaky legs and managed to limp out of the small shack, noticing with shock the surrounding buildings. EY didn't look like anything he had seen before, even if most were. Crumbling and covered with strange yellow ivy crawling up the walls. Everywhere he looked he saw city, and not just this small section of Old Town. There were tall steel skyscrapers reaching up far into the sky, consisting of hundreds upon thousands of floors, glinting in the sunlight of a large golden sun that was clearly beginning its descent in the sky. But it was what was in the air that made him gape and wonder if he had, in fact, finally lost his mind. There were car-like structures actually flying through the alleyways, skyscrapers. Millions of them as far as he could tell, all like Muggle cars on a street, except these were flying. It seemed that these things were perfectly natural, since no one seemed shocked by this occurrence. But he nearly lost his ability to stand as he realized. He had no idea where he was. This couldn't be the afterlife, this wasn't natural, not human. "Son." The man frowned, and started to reach for him. "Son, if you need some help." But then he recoiled with a cry, for Harry, having realized he had his wand in his possession, had drawn it and aimed a stinging jinx at the soldier. He was frightened, confused, and didn't want to have anyone touching him, and the pain of his body threw all caution to the winds. Even as the alien drew back in shock, he turned again and ran as best as he could with his stiff leg. The soldier, astonished and angered, drew out his comlink. "Attention, all guards in sections 800 to 810, we have a young human, male, badly injured, running through the Undercity. Orders to all who happen to find him: restrain, but do not harm. Warning: the male has a weapon." There was a ripple of unrest in the force. Something had upset its balance, as if a door had opened and then swung closed just as quickly. There was a presence out there among Coruscant's citizens that had not been there before. Even from here, fear and pain could be sensed pouring into the force, boiling in its intensity. Not Sith, not even totally dark, just human. Simple human instinct. It was worrying. Seated in the meditation chambers of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, Grand Moss Chair, Luke Skywalker of the Jedi opened his eyes, frowning in concentration and confusion. He thought he was probably the only Jedi who could sense the emotions, since they were so faint, and since he was better at sensing emotion than most. It had him concerned, why he didn't exactly know. Was it the Force telling him that he had to do something? Or was it only his own thoughts pulling him in different directions? Should he send out a team of Jedi Knights to go find this mysterious person? No, he ruled that possibility out. If Coruscant's military guard needed help, they would call. Jedi were N.O.T. called for simple capture. They were not a police force, however much some senators seemed to think so. He could only wait. Besides, he had other things to worry about, like the newest missions for the Knights and Masters. Of Cal Omaz's growing distrust of the Jedi, and of what he was going to do about his son Ben joining the flying squadrons a little over a month ago. Ben had wanted to go, even more than he had wanted to train as a Jedi, and so Luke and his wife Mara, determined to let their son grow into his choices, had allowed him to. Luke seriously hoped that the choice would not lead to evil later. He sighed. He needed to stop becoming so stressed. Soon he would become more gray-headed than blonde if he didn't calm down more. Of course, ever since blasting out of Mos Eisley Spaceport almost 30 years ago, he had felt that time had never slowed down. He found it surprising that he was even almost 50 at times, sure that he should have died multiple times over the years. He felt a familiar presence come up to his door, and he turned in time to find Corran Horn, one of the most experienced Jedi Masters there, standing breathless. "Master Skywalker," he said hurriedly, "I apologize for my interruption." "What is it, Master Horn?" Corran shook his head. "The guard sent the Jedi word there's a rogue human male causing trouble in the underworld levels. They can't get close enough to him to stop him. And he's becoming dangerous." Luke stood, feeling his gut tighten as he recalled the fear and pain he had felt through the Force. "I'll gather some of our best masters and we'll go help. Will you prepare our speeders?" "Yes, Master Skywalker." "Good. Go, quickly." And as Corran turned and left at a run, Luke turned briefly to the large windows of the temple, deep in contemplation. Before he followed Corran out the door, preparing to call his wife through his comm. The Jedi swiftly flew through Coruscant's traffic, deftly avoiding crashes and other obstacles that would have hindered ordinary drivers. They weren't called Jedi for nothing, however, so they didn't worry. Leading them was Luke and his wife Mara Jade, Luke driving, while Mara looked at him with hard emerald eyes. "So all this is for a kid?" "That's what Colonel Maxell said." Luke nodded, his eyes fixed on the traffic speeding by. "From what he told me it was a boy, probably younger than 20, small, slight, badly injured. The colonel found him while limping through the Undercity, and when he tried to grab the boy's arm, he was attacked. The kid turned and ran. The other soldiers can't get close to him. They're being hindered by something, but they don't know by what." Mara shook her head. "I don't like it, Skywalker. It's just too odd, even for us." He grinned. "Who says? I can think of 10 things stranger than some kid attacking Coruscant guard." He was trying to forget the odd ripples of the Force he had felt before. It wasn't working very well, and clearly Mara saw that too, because she glared, opening her mouth to speak. Then a tremendous bang echoed through the air, and Luke had to swerve as a man suddenly came flying into the traffic. Cursing, he turned the speeder into a roll, and Mara, ready, flung herself from her seat and onto the roof of the building that was luckily now below them. As Luke struggled to not crash, she rolled up to a crouching position and came face to face with the adversary they were supposed to fight. Before she could even draw her lightsaber, however, she heard a young voice say something and suddenly she flew backwards through the air. Landing at least 10 feet away on the hard stone roof, the breath knocked out of her. Even as she landed, 4 other masters Kip Duran, Corran Horn, Saba Sabedon, and Octa Ramis tried to come at the stranger, but all were held back somehow by a barrier. Then Kip and Octa fell back like Mara, while Saba attempted to circle around their opponent and Corran pressed forward. Luke, landing the speeder behind their adversary, leapt out of it, checking to see that Mara and the others were all right. When he saw they were getting their bearings straight, he went forward, preparing to strike, when suddenly the boy turned to him. And he, all right, and beaten, his face was covered with bruises and his clothing, so odd in their pattern and faded coloring, was ripped and bloody. His pain and anger lit up the force like a beacon. With unbelievable reflexes, the boy swung up what Luke thought to be a simple rod of wood. Protega, mental nod and stood, regaining his control. "We're not going to harm you," he said as gently as he could, unsure if the boy would even be able to understand basic. He hoped that communication was possible. They needed to stop the rampage before someone actually got injured, or before the boy burnt himself out. But the boy only snarled at him, his eyes bright with anger and pain. "Coming after me with a weapon, isn't HN?" A weak, unsteady voice, and again Luke was surprised at how young he seemed. And how much agony he seemed to be in. He needed medical attention. The bright red stains on his clothing were spreading, and his body was trembling. His leg ked like it was going to collapse beneath him at any moment, and Luke realized they wouldn't need to worry about fighting much longer. Sure enough, even as Luke thought that, the boy paled as the pain of his wounds caught up with him as adrenaline started to ebb, surely feeling dizzy with blood loss. The invisible barrier was flickering, weakening as well, and the Jedi Masters all tensed in preparation. Bad mistake. The stranger seemed to sense this, and his force aura sharpened with anger again. The barrier fell, and even as the Jedi moved forward, the boy swerved to the side, slipping somehow between the others, and called out another word that was garbled by the speeders going by. To the astonishment of the Jedi, ropes suddenly sprang into existence and wrapped themselves around Kip, who cried out in anger and struggled against them. He couldn't throw them off, however, not even with the force behind his grip. With a growl of anger, Saba leapt forward, but was thrown off by the barrier again. But it was Mara who dealt the final blow. With the quick skills taught to her by Emperor Palpatine, she weaved through the crowd, and as Saba retreated, she crept up on the boy and with a quick swipe she struck the boy on the side of his head with her lightsaber hilt. He collapsed immediately, his legs buckling beneath him as he crumpled to the ground in a heap. As quickly as he fell, power that the Jedi could sense dissipated like it had never been, and the Jedi Masters were left standing over the body of a kid who was hurt and bleeding. "The power he produced," Kip exclaimed in shock 20 minutes later as they walked into the med center. They had left the boy in the hands of the MD droid there. Saba, Corran, and Octa Ramis had gone back to the temple while Luke, Mara, and Kip had stayed to know the boy's condition. Luke nodded. "I know, Kip," he said softly. "I just hope he's not too badly injured. He's so young, yet old enough to attack us," Mara countered, her eyes hard. They had been ever since she had knocked the stranger out. It was clear she was not giving him the benefit of the doubt, not like Luke was. "He didn't actually harm us," he protested. "He only tried to protect himself, you know that, Mara." "Yes," Kip interjected sarcastically, "he only used power we know nothing about." "Come on, Master Skywalker. Even if the kid didn't actually harm us, you know that we can't take this lightly. He has power that we've never seen, that we haven't heard of before." "Yeah, I can't deny he didn't actually harm us, but neither can you deny that he wasn't pouring anger into the Force, which, as we all know, is a dark emotion. He seemed to allow it to lead him like a Sith." Luke stiffened, and even Mara reacted negatively to such a statement. "Kip, even if I agree that he's dangerous," she said, "I can't see him being a Sith. He didn't fight like one. I don't even think he has access to the Force at all. He doesn't need it." Luke's softly spoken attempt caused both Jedi to stop speaking, and simultaneously they turned to him. He wasn't looking at them, instead he sat stiffly in his seat, his brow drawn down into a frown. His Force presence was tight, and his diamond blue eyes were thoughtful as he thought. Finally, I don't believe he is dark. Yes, he allowed his anger to lead him, but the point still stands that he didn't allow it to harm anyone. He shifted, and his gaze lost focus as he contemplated or looked at a vision. There's something about him, he murmured, his left hand clenching slightly. A sense of destiny. Mara looked sharply at him and opened her mouth to speak. Master Skywalker. Master Duran. The automated voice of the MD caught their attention and they looked up at the same time to find the droid standing before them. One arm gestured in its halting way to the entrance of the room. The patient is stable and lucid. Lucid? Mara asked, shocked. Shouldn't his wounds have kept him unconscious for several hours, if not a couple of days? Beside her, Luke and Kip shared a glance. Yes, came the reply. That is what is so odd, Master Skywalker. The patient should have been under for 26 standard hours, 8 minutes. And 35 seconds. He woke up halfway through our exam and had to be sedated. As the guard placed the patient under your judgment, I must ask you to come and speak with him. You can't just send him to sleep to keep healing him. Kip asked. The MD's voice grew slightly cold. No, we have tried to give him stronger sleeping medicine, but there seems to be something preventing him from being affected. I need to point out, too, that the patient seems to be rather wild. Things have been flying around in the room, and when I tried to give the patient a stronger sedative, the needle bent. Come again? Luke asked, astounded. The needle bent? Yes, onto itself. It has been decided that the patient cannot be helped here. We ask that you and your order take him. There was obvious reluctance even in a droid's monotonous voice, and the 3 Jedi could tell even without aid of the Force that the MD was unhappy about discharging a patient. Luke stood. All right, we'll go see him. The room the droid led them to smelled of Bacta salve and antiseptics, and was as white and immaculately clean as they always were. The boy lay limply on one of the gurney-like cots there. His Force aura pulsing gently, but it was cold, shocked, as if unable to feel emotion. Luke wondered if it was because of the sedative. They were watched warily by their new charge as they approached. They were careful to keep their hands in plain view, so he didn't feel threatened. Nevertheless, he tensed visibly the closer they came, until finally his Force aura twisted with quickly suppressed fear and curiosity, confusion. Then it was smothered by a feeling of numbness, and the boy's eyes never showed anything. Luke spoke first. It seems you aren't a very good patient, son, he said quietly. He felt more than heard Mara's sarcastic snort, and could practically feel her smirk at his words. Farm boy. He sent a quick blast of irritation her way, telling her now was not the time, and continued. The Jedi have been asked to take you under our wing, so we'll need to leave soon. How are your wounds? The boy frowned, as if confused he was asked such a question. He didn't speak, but Luke could tell by the heavy bandages that the wounds were going to need a lot more than salve. They didn't seem to be bleeding, though, which was a very good thing. He sighed. What's your name, son? He watched the boy's eyes flash with irritation and his Force essence tightened. Finally, however, Harry Potter. He spoke it so quietly that the Jedi almost missed it. I'm Jedi Luke Skywalker, Luke replied softly, and motioned to his companions, and this is my wife Mara, and Kip Duran, both Jedi as well. I'm being watched by the very people who attacked me. The sarcastic question caused Kip to stiffen, but a warning glance from Luke stopped him from speaking. Mara refrained from rolling her eyes. I'm sorry that we had to do that, Harry, Luke apologized with genuine regret. But as Jedi we are guardians of peace and order. The guard could not get close enough to you to stop your rampage in which you caused many people harm and several crashes. So we were called to help. Disruption on such a scale will not and cannot be tolerated. All right, Skywalker, Mara interrupted impatiently, her arms crossed over her chest. Don't go all Jedi Master on him, he's had a rough day. Let's just get him to the temple and find out what the Force we're going to do now. Where am I? The softly spoken question surprised the 3 Jedi as they walked into the temple. They were not expecting the inquiry. Their charge had barely spoken since they'd left the med center. He had instead walked witting silence, his Force aura cold and elusive. He had balked at entering speeder that the Jedi took to the temple, looking at them suspiciously clearly intimidated by the sight of something flying through the air. While they had been flying, Luke had caught a burst of R.W. Helming sorrow shoot through the Force from the boy, and he had glanced back to the seat where he was sitting to see Harry, swallowing back what he was quite sure were tears. Luke had not commented, choosing to allow the boy his space. Besides, they would know this mystery when they got to the temple. Mara had called ahead and assembled the Masters still planet side, telling them a meeting was urgent. Throughout all of this, the boy had not spoken, so it came as a surprise to hear him. Now, Kip frowned from where he sat beside Harry. "What do you mean, kid?" "I'm not a kid," he replied through clenched teeth, his eyes flashing irritably. "I'm meaning that I don't know where I am. This doesn't even look like Earth." "Earth?" Mara's voice was dubious, her eyebrows raised in a sarcastic way. "What's that?" "The planet I live on." Now the boy sounded confused, maybe a little frightened again. "Are you saying this isn't Earth?" "It's Coruscant," Kip replied, looking baffled. "Force? Who hasn't heard of Coruscant?" "Clearly I haven't," was the sarcastic reply, and Luke half winced, half grinned as he glanced at Mara. This kid had her sharp tongue, something he knew you shouldn't be at the receiving end of. His wife sensed what he was thinking and sent him a nudge through their bond, telling him to listen to the conversation. He did so, in time to hear Harry say, "And clearly you haven't heard about Earth." His Force presence shifted with deepening confusion which almost masked the pain of his wrapped-up wounds. "This isn't anything like home," they heard him murmur quietly to himself. There was longing, a sense of homesickness laced in his tone, and the Jedi could tell his thoughts were clearly drifting to loved ones and friends. They had felt this before, and it never got any easier. Mara parked the speeder inside the temple's hangar and jumped out. "Well, we're gonna see if we can't straighten all of this out, kid. Coming, Skywalker." Without waiting for a reply she walked off in the direction of the doors. Master Sabaton said that the council has assembled. It was chaos in the council chambers. The 10 or so Jedi Masters there were all speaking at once, there. Bafflement and disbelief permeating the Force in a roiling cloud of confusion, having heard the boy's story of how he got here about being captured by a Dark Lord named Voldemort, told to walk through a veil. About falling through darkness and landing here on Coruscant, about running from the people chasing him, of their pursuit, and finally his confrontation with the Jedi. Unsurprisingly, even T. Huff they could sense Harry was telling the truth. The Masters found it incredibly unbelievable. It was Luke's niece Jaina Solo, the newest member of the council, who was the most vocal about that. "This is just too impossible. Even for us," she was exclaiming vehemently, her chocolate brown eyes glaring distrustfully at the boy where he stood before the semicircle of Masters. "People don't just drop out of space with powers we don't know anything about," claiming. "Enough, Jedi Solo," Luke finally said quietly, but it served to quiet the whole room. "You know as well as I do that he is telling the truth. No matter how impossible it may sound." His rebuke served to make her sink into her seat a little, knowing if she denied that she was saying the head of the Jedi Order was a fool. And no one could call Luke Skywalker a fool. Ignoring his niece's outburst completely now, he leaned forward, studying the boy standing before him carefully. Such a strange person referring himself to Harry Potter, a name that sounded alien. And yet he was human, telling them the odd tale of how he got here and yet was telling the truth. "You told us that your name is Harry Potter," he said quietly, "And we cannot sense that you are lying." He glanced warningly at Jaina, who had begun to open her mouth again, "but there is still a lot that just doesn't make sense. For starters, you say you're from Earth. But we know nothing of such a planet in our galaxy, called Coruscant, and my planet always thought we were the only kind of life in the universe." Luke looked over at her in surprise. "How do you figure that, Master Skywalker?" She smirked. "Think about it, Luke," she said quietly. "A planet we've never heard of, a veil that is a mystery to everyone, a people we know nothing about, and he says he can do magic. Something we don't have. He's never heard of the Force, and doesn't have access to and hasn't even heard of the galaxy's capital planet. Clearly, he's not from here. Oh, you're saying that the veil he was shoved through was a portal?" Kip asked now from his seat. "I wasn't pushed. I went through on my own," the boy snapped, suddenly angry. Sudden silence. The entire council looked at him in surprise, unable to believe what he had just said. You went through on your own violation, Luke said, recovering first. You willingly left your own world to go through something like that. It was either that or die at Voldemort's hands, Harry replied, looking at the floor, his voice dropping to a shamed whisper. And I really didn't like the idea of dying that way. At least going through the veil was quick. The Jedi looked at each other, concerned by his words. Even Jaina looked shaken. No child should talk about dying like it was nothing. How old are you? Luke finally asked, turning back to the object of his attention. Harry looked back at him. Almost 16, sir. Almost 16. And in his world he was dead. Luke sat back in his seat, feeling suddenly weak from the revelation. His gut tightening. Taking a deep breath, he shut his eyes briefly to calm himself, and he thought he felt the Force whispering to him, saying, trust him. Help him. He decided to do just that. Opening his eyes again, he saw Mara looking at him in concern, but he merely shook his head and turned to Harry. You need somewhere to go, yes. The boy frowned, surprised. Yes, he agreed slowly. Well, you can't fend for yourself out in Coruscant without knowing anything about it. Luke looked at all of the council. I think we can all agree that he needs somewhere to stay. They nodded. And I suppose we can all say that he can't stay at the temple. Again, there were nods all around. Good. If everyone is supportive of the proposition, I say Mara and I take him und. Our wing until such a time comes that we can figure this all out. Again all agreed, and Luke nodded. Very well. He stood. Now, the Order needs some assistance at Dantooine. It seems that the PLA-NT life there is causing more trouble there than is wise. There were winces, as they all recalled the horrid Yuuzhan Vong plants that had taken over any planet occupied by them. Masters Sabaton and Corran, I would like you to take a team of 10 knights and help the local government there. Meeting adjourned. The dismissal was abrupt, but the Jedi Masters didn't let the surprise of it show. One by one the others stood, bowed respectfully, and left. Jaina was last. She turned to her uncle, standing before him in all of her mother's stature so that her small frame seemed taller. Uncle Luke, I know this is your decision. But do you really think we can trust this kid? We don't know anything about him. He could be a spy sent on the Order. Jaina sighed, defeated. All right, she said quietly. You do like to give people the benefit of the doubt. Do you want me to tell Mom and Dad about this? Luke shook his head, seeing Mara slowly approaching Harry. No, there's no need for them to come home early from Corellia just for this. Jaina nodded. I'll stop by within the week, she said. I'll bring Jason along. Good. Maybe we can figure out what this boy's been through. Are you ready to go, Mara? He asked 10 minutes later as Jaina left. He stopped at Mara's side and Lori, who gazed right back. They were roughly the same height, the boy more slender than Luke. He sensed Mara's frustration and knew she hadn't been able to crack Harry's shell. Again, that surprised Luke as a former Emperor's hand. Mara knew how to get information from someone. She did not show any of this on her face or in her eyes, however. As she replied, yes, I suppose I am. Turning on her heel, she started towards the door, calling over her shoulder, I'll get the speeder started. It was those words that made Luke realize that Harry had heard his conversation with Jaina. He opened his mouth to protest, to deny it, but then realized that was exactly what he was doing. I suppose that's true, he finally replied reluctantly. I can't look at you now and see you as a friend or ally, because I don't know anything about you. You very well could be a spy sent here to get information, and if I didn't at least try to keep my eye on you, I'd be responsible if my judgment proved false. Harry blinked, and his Force presence grew hot with surprise. Luke thought that he had surprised the boy his response, as if he'd expected a different one, or not one at all. Harry's face froze and he stopped mid-step. His Force presence went cold again. I told you, he said roughly, Voldemort caught me. He doesn't allow anyone to leave his sight without some mementos first. Harry's cryptic response was not by any means lost on Luke, and the Jedi Master stopped in shock. He could remember, in his mind's eye, the Emperor's Force lightning as it danced through the air, torturing Luke with it, but he knew that wasn't how Harry had been so injured. The wounds on his person had been inflicted purposely, for pain and for death. He'd been tortured. He struggled to push down his horror. So, did he leave any more memoirs, other than these, that we should know about? Now it was Harry's turn to pause. In his own world, if he had stumbled into those who cared for him in such a state, there would have been hysterical screaming and people insistently grabbing him to heal his wounds, fawning over him and generally treating him as he were on his deathbed. But this man standing beside him was not looking at him like he had become a glass figurine, someone to smother. It was with a tangible, but not overbearing concern that this man asked about his well-being. No, he said softly. Perhaps he was tempted to say yes, and explain the Cruciatus curse Voldemort had used on him, creating he aching pain that throbbed throughout his limbs, but he had suffered through its effects in silence before, and he didn't want to take the chance that this man's behavior might change to the type he detested. No, he didn't do anything else. The man's face flickered for a moment, but then it was gone, and Harry wondered what it meant. It made him uneasy, and he started to withdraw again, but then stopped. This man, the one referred to as Luke, or Master Skywalker, was looking at him with understanding, not scorn or pity. It confused him. Could he trust this stranger? The man didn't look dangerous. But Harry had seen him fight well. He was small and lithe, muscular, with graying blonde hair and calloused hands. His eyes were pale blue and burned with a sharp intensity not unlike Dumbledore's, but they were gentle and open. A deceiving appearance. No one would suspect he was dangerous until it was too late. Luke smiled slightly to assure Harry, sensing the boy's inner turmoil. He had caught the boy's lie just then, but decided not to press. The MD hadn't said anything about internal wounds. Come on, he said again. We'll put some Bacta salve on them when we get home. They didn't speak again until they climbed into the speeder, and that was only to assure Harry that it was safe. The ride through Coruscant's airways was silent, and both Skywalkers saw Harry rest his head against the window, drifting off right where he sat, the rapid flurry of his Force presence slowing and quieting in his exhaustion. Until finally he slipped into sleep. When Luke and Mara reached their apartments, Luke carried him in and together they worked to fix their guest's battered body. Mara shook her head as she worked to unwrap his ribs. What monster would do this to a boy, Skywalker? She asked rhetorically, her eyes flinty. Luke could feel her anger through their bond, and pushing down his own natural inclinations of anger at the hurt of a child, he sent calmness to her so that her stiff shoulders slumped slightly. He grabbed some Bacta spray and liberally spread it across the boy's sleeping cleaned wounds. Harry was so deeply asleep that he did not stir at all with their gentle handing of him. Luke shook his head and silently answered Mara's question. Who indeed? They stayed up with Harry that night, making sure their guest was all right and in no danger of his wounds, talking softly, struggling to understand what they were needed to do. Luke shook his head. It's the will of the Force, he answered softly. We've got to trust that what we're doing is the right thing. Mara turned to look out the glass viewports, one of her hands curled around her waist, the other playing with a lock of long auburn hair. I still don't like it, she said quietly. And you think I do? Luke stood from where he'd been sitting and came up behind her, reaching up to hold her close to him. Have faith, my love, he said. It'll work out. We'll understand one day. Mara snorted. I'm glad one of us is sure. She answered wryly. Our main objective right now is to help him, he replied, rubbing her shoulders, then grasping her hand and kissing her fingers. It's clear Harry isn't a spy, and he needs aid even if it's just someplace to stay. If only for that, Mara asked. She turned in his arms and rested her head on his chest. Luke, you felt the same things from him as I did. The anger and frustration and just plain ruthlessness that he fought with. And when he was released from the med center, he shut down. He's dangerous, Luke. If he had access to the Force he'd be easy prey for the dark side. But he doesn't have access to the Force, Luke countered gently. And you saw that he didn't use that anger fighting us. He used his magic, to defend himself, not to permanently harm any of us. He was angry, yes, but I think it was because he had been tortured if his wounds are any clue. He really is pure of heart, Mara. I could sense it. He isn't dark. Then what is he, Skywalker? Mara asked, perhaps a mite scornfully. At that very moment, however, the force suddenly flailed with chilling fear, and they turned as one to Harry, who still lay asleep on the couch, but clearly slipping into the rips of a nightmare. His body tensed, his face tightening with emotion as the force seized up. No, they heard him moan, almost pleadingly, no, please. It was Mar. Who reacted. She reached out with the force and sent a wave of reassurance and calm his way, and to their relief Harry settled down, the vestiges of the nightmare dissipating. Luke sighed. He's lost and he's hurting, Mara, he said softly. He's just a boy. When Harry woke up, he found he was settled on a comfortable, rather long sofa in a suite. Morning sunlight streamed through large windows that really acted as the walls, supported by beams, spilling across his face gently, and the smell of something cooking permeated the room. For one split second panic rose in his throat as he looked around. But then with difficulty he forced it down, knowing it wouldn't help. He sat up quickly, then realized he was going to aggravate his wounds, and almost cringed in anticipation of the pain. But the pain he expected never came. The dull ache of the Cruciatus curse remained, but his body did not erupt in fiery agony like it had before. Confused, he looked down to inspect himself, and his jaw dropped. His chest and stomach were not riddled with the deep wounds from Voldemort's cutting hexes. Indeed, there was nothing to suggest that he had been injured in the first place. His skin was smooth and unmarked. Not even a scar remained. Harry, good, you're awake. Sorry, he muttered embarrassedly. It's all right, Luke assured him quietly, moving closer to the couch. I'm not surprised you reacted like that. How long have I been here? Harry asked abruptly, in no mood for pleasantries. He couldn't call enough shame up for his rudeness. He'd been through too much the past few days, especially with Sirius. Hastily he shoved those thoughts aside, unwilling to think about that, but nonetheless he felt the gloom settled around him deepen. If Luke had caught anything of his thoughts, he didn't show it. Almost 4 days, he answered, and this time he really did smile when seeing Harry's shock. I had placed you in a healing trance so your wounds would heal faster. It seems they didn't take that long at all. Even a Jedi wouldn't have been completely healed until a week had passed. It's because wizards heal more quickly than muggles or non-magic folk do, Harry said absently, and caught Luke's frown of confusion. Wizards, it's what we call ourselves. People who can do magic. Men are called warlocks and women are witches. So like the witches of Dathomir, Luke said softly, nodding his understanding. Harry frowned. The witches of Dathomir, Luke said, grinning. A planet that is really run by large clans of women who are all force sensitive. Over the centuries, however, they forgot about the force and now believe their abilities to be born of what they call magic. I've had a few of the witches of Dathomir at my academy, not least of all Tanal Ka, the Chumda of the Hoppins. Her mother had been born and raised a witch. The planet holds some rather interesting history for me and my sister Leia and her husband Han. And for the Jedi of the Old Republic. Harry stared at him. Do I really want to know? Luke shrugged. Depends. If you want the long or short version. Oh wait, there is no short version. No, you probably don't want to hear about it right now. Harry's mouth twitched in the beginning of a smile, and he took a step forward but nearly had to sit again when a wave of dizziness hit him. He took a moment to steady himself and realized how hungry he had somehow become. He heard Luke's low chuckle. It's normal for you to be hungry and lightheaded after a healing trance, he explained. It's nothing a good meal won't fix. Luke frowned. Not really, he answered slowly. See, everyone belongs to the Force. It's the factor that holds the universe together, and everyone, whether you have access to it or not, has a presence in the Force. Force users like the Jedi can sense emotions from people because their Force presences change due to their emotions. He shrugged. Sometimes a Jedi can pick up a thought or a memory, but that's rare. I can pick up your emotions well because I'm naturally better at sensing someone's feelings. You haven't learned to control what you broadcast through the Force, so natural. The Jedi are going to sense your emotions. Oh, Harry wasn't sure if he was assured or not. He supposed it was a good thing that these Jedi wouldn't be able to see his memories, but his emotions were bad enough. He fought the resentment that rose up inside of him, knowing that among these people he was vulnerable, and instead distracted himself by looking around at the large room. It was airy and lit both by the sunlight and overhead lights. The carpet, which looked and smelled clean and new, was a deep red with delicate white strange floral patterns. She looked irritated, and when she turned to them it was with a huff and a hand on her hip. "Skywalker," she said with a glare, "you know I love you dearly, but this is the last time you talk me into cooking breakfast." He smiled innocently as he motioned Harry to take a seat. "We all have our shameful little secrets, Mara," he replied, a sly note underlying his words. She pointed the cooking utensil in her hand at him like a finger. "Shut it, farm boy," she warned him with a slight smile. "This meal very well may be your last." "Yeah," he deadpanned, "with your cooking it probably could be." Laughing, he dodged the spatula she threw at him. Harry watched in open-mouthed surprise. The two adults were acting like a pair of playful teenagers, not like the calm and collected adults they had introduced themselves as. Strange. It almost made him smile, thinking it was odd but also a good thing. Unable to keep from laughing herself, Mara turned the heat off and dumped the Nerf sausage into a bowl, then grabbed a jug of blue milk and carried them both to the table. Harry looked at the different foods curiously, wondering where they all came from. He watched Luke and Mara take their seats, and then, led by his growling stomach, decided to forego stubbornness and filled his plate. "What's this?" he asked, motioning to the crumbling brown meat that he was setting on his plate. "Nerf sausage," Mara answered with a glare at Luke, who merely grinned back. "Nerf," Harry repeated with a raised brow. "It sounds like something you'd call someone when they're being stupid. Or you can embellish it and call them a stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking Nerf herder," Mara added with a smirk. Harry looked between them. "I'm missing something, aren't I?" Luke laughed again. Some 30-odd years ago, Leia called her future husband that, all what Mara just said. Of course, Han being Han, he just replied with, "Who's scruffy looking?" and brushed her insults off. He shook his head in exasperation. He should have gotten on his knee and proposed to her right then and there. Everyone could see they liked each other except for them. Harry's mouth twitched into a smile again and his Force presence flared slightly with a wave of humor, but then it was gone, drowned by the coldness that was wrapped around him. Mara, having caught it, felt disappointed and wondered what it would feel like to sense pure humor from the boy, without any sarcasm or bitterness accompanied with it. "Sounds familiar," they heard him mutter as he looked down at his plate. "Oh," Mara asked. "Why is that?" Harry took a tentative bite of the sausage before deciding whether or not he was going to answer, pausing slightly when the taste of the meat's rich spice filled his senses. "It really was excellent, better than even regular sausage. I have a couple of friends who are exactly like that. They bicker and fight all the time, have whole weeks, full weeks where they won't speak to each other, and yet it's so blaringly obvious that they like each other you just want to slap them both and tell them to kiss already." Luke and Mara looked at each other with identical grins. "Yep," Luke remarked, "that definitely sounds like Han and Leia before they married." He motioned to the boy's plate. "Eat as much as you want, all right. It costs the body a lot of energy to heal itself through a trance. You'll need to eat a lot. Otherwise you'll be lightheaded all day," Mara added. Speaking from personal experience, Harry's face flushed. "I couldn't do that," he objected, talking about the food. "I'm just a guest. Besides, I don't usually eat a lot, anyway." His hastily muttered words caused the two Jedi to glance at each other again, and then Luke shook his head. "Guest or not, Harry, you need to eat. We have more than enough food for the three of us and many more." The buzzing of the comm caught their attentions, and Luke stood from the table to activate the speaker. "Master Skywalker speaking," he said, and motioned for Mara and Harry to continue eating. "Master Skywalker," came a vaguely familiar voice Harry thought he knew. "Kenth," Luke frowned. "What is it?" "You need to come to the temple right away, Luke. We're having some issues with the head of state." Luke rolled his eyes, but didn't allow his opinion of that ripple through the Force. "Very well, Master Hamner. I'll be there right away." "Take your time, Skywalker," she replied, smirking. "We'll be just fine here. I think Jaina will be stopping by later." "Good. Is she bringing Jason along?" "I believe so. They're getting the apartments ready for when Luke nodded. "I'll make this quick, then." He leaned down and kissed her swiftly on the lips, grinned at Harry, then was gone. Silence fell thickly, so thickly that a knife could have cut it. Mara went back to eating. And Harry followed suit. Neither of them spoke until, finally, Mara lost patience with the teen's brooding silence and laid her fork down. You know, kid, she remarked, I've met a lot of stubborn teenagers who refuse to speak about anything, but you should know that Luke and I didn't take you in just to have you ignore us. Harry looked back up at her, and his eyes were hot. I didn't know that healing for 4 days was ignoring you, he retorted coldly as she ever could. She sighed. No, it's not, she conceded, but you don't have to keep up this cold demeanor around us, Harry. We're not going to hurt you. Didn't stop your husband from going after me with a weapon, he snapped. Mara struggled to keep from snapping back. It would do neither of them good if this became a shouting match. Besides, he had a point. We weren't planning on defeat you, she told him finally, having restored her calm. We weren't even trying to harm you, either. We were hoping we could subdue you enough to calm you down so we could talk to you. And yet you still came after me violently, he answered her snidely. And then she abruptly noticed the sly look in his eyes. And she realized he was playing her. She almost cursed her stupidity. His anger was real, but he was gauging her reactions, testing her truthfulness and how well she checked her temper. She sighed, realizing he was going to take a lot to get through to completely. Only for defense, she countered gently. Just as you use that stick as your defense. We Jedi use the Force and our lightsaber. In battle you wizards seem to use magic and our wands, he said, and he seemed to reach for his before realizing that he didn't have it. Where is it, anyway? He demanded, looking at her with a hard gaze. He seemed almost nervous about the fact that it was gone. Mara could easily understand the feeling to be stripped of a weapon. What was more, she began to realize that a wizard's relationship with his wand was similar to a Jedi's without their lightsaber. It didn't feel right not having it, even for a moment. It made you feel vulnerable. She sighed again. Skywalker has it, she admitted, almost reluctant to say so. When you were in the med center, the droid looking over you gave it to us. I don't suppose I'll be getting it back anytime soon, Harry sighed, looking disheartened. E-sub levels that would not hesitate to harm or defeat a teenager. You aren't prepared to be alone here on Coruscant. Is that why Luke took me in? He asked expressionlessly. He didn't think I can take of myself. Don't be thick, she scolded him. When you first came here, you took on the best Jedi Masters there are. You stood your ground and did a darn good job of it, too. But that doesn't mean that we weren't and still aren't concerned about what happens to you. You are still rather young to have been through what you said you went through. Actually, she added thoughtfully, I really think Skywalker's beginning to care about you. His reaction was not one she was expecting. Do me a favor, he snapped, suddenly very white in the face. Don't. He made to stand up, to leave, but Mara reached out and grasped his wrist. And why not? Shoulders, and in a dangerous phase of identity crisis as he struggled to understand who he was. She sat back in her seat, very glad that Harry didn't sense her sudden upwelling of turmoil. Leaving the kitchen, Harry went back to the couch he'd been on previously and struggled to stop his uncontrollable shivering. Shakily, he ran his fingers through his hair and then wearily rubbed his face, feeling old and suddenly exhausted. His thoughts drifted to Sirius, and his anguish deepened, along with his self-loathing. He had been stupid enough to fall for Voldemort's trap at the Ministry, and that had led to Sirius's falling through the veil. It had been there that Voldemort had taken him as a prisoner. He remembered being put under the Cr. Cruciatus curse after chasing Bellatrix Lestrange to the Atrium. It had been the first curse of many. Those days of his captivity were blurred and hazy. All he could recall was a dark room, cold freezing air, and the Death Eaters who came to bring him before Voldemort. His last lucid memory before the going with the Death Eaters to the Vale was being put under the worst Cruciatus curse he'd ever experienced. He had fought against his captors then, and it had ended with him pressed against the wall with Voldemort's wand pressed against his scar. He could recall his own screams until finally his body couldn't take any more and he had passed out. It had been pain beyond endurance, and he would never forget the awful fear he had felt that day, never forget anything of that day. Will you sing for me, my little songbird? Will you tell me the prophecy? Surely you want the pain to stop. He had wanted it too, so badly, he had pleaded for it to stop. He didn't know the prophecy, he never had. Hey, kid, the unfamiliar voice caused him to jump and reach for his wand again, and this time cursed when he realized, again, that he didn't have it. Turning, he looked to see who had spoken and saw the girl from the temple standing there with a young man beside her. They were both brown-haired and brown-eyed, although the man was much taller than the girl. They were dressed in very different outfits as well. While the man wore simple robes, the girl was wearing a tight black suit that had insignia on its right shoulder. They were both looking at him with similar expressions, though one of confusion, surprise. He nearly cursed again, wondering if they had sensed his emotions through the force, whatever the heck that was, and desperately wished he could do some wandless magic. It was the man who moved first. Recovering from his surprise, he looked over at his companion. This is the kid Uncle Luke picked up 4 days ago. She nodded silently, her eyes never leaving Harry, who glared defiantly back at her. You do realize that he's projecting anger and fear within a 5-mile radius, right? But before anything could be said, he turned back to Harry and managed a grin. Sorry if I startled you right now. I swear I don't do it on purpose. He extended a calloused, well-worn hand. I'm Jason Solo, Jaina's twin brother. Younger brother, she interjected with a smirk. By almost 2 minutes. Put a cork in it, you. Jason said good-naturedly, still grinning, but it faded a bit when Harry made no move to return his greeting. Jason, Jaina, Mara's voice caused them all to turn. And then the brother and sister were being enfolded into a hug by their aunt. We were expecting a visit from you today, but I wasn't sure when you'd stop by. Are your flight drills done, Jaina? No, we have a couple more days to go through, and then we all have a short leave, which means that Ben will be back soon. Mara smiled, and the Solo twins felt the force light up with her delight. The thought of her son always cheered her up where not even Luke could. I've certainly missed him. Luke has, too. He's just too stubborn to admit it. Harry, throughout all of this, silently walked away from this meeting. Wanting nothing more than to get away. He didn't want to hear about a family, didn't want to witness it, unable to bear it. Of all the weaknesses he had, he detested the wish for a family the most because it was the one thing he would never have. To his enormous relief, he wasn't noticed, and so he left the room, practically fleeing to the back of the suite, not caring that he didn't know where he was going. Better to get away from the agony Voldemort could never induce. When Luke came back from the meeting from the head of state, he found Mara curled up in her chair, reading a datapad absent-mindedly. He could tell by her unfocused eyes, however, that she really wasn't reading it at all, but instead contemplating something else. He could easily her attention, even if the thing was not sitting there with her in the room. Luke could sense a familiar roiling in the force that he had sensed 4 days ago, and sighed. Hello, love, he said softly, walking up to his wife. Mara merely grunted a greeting, then went back to her datapad. He frowned. Mara, what's wrong? She looked up at him now, and her eyes had that hard gleam in them when she was troubled and trying to hide it. Mara, she sighed, shaking her head. Are we going to be able to help Harry, Luke? She asked softly. He frowned and kneeled on one knee beside her. What do you mean? She met his gaze, suddenly angry. I mean, Skywalker, she retorted, and her eyes flashed, whether we're helping Harry or whether we're hurting him. No, let me talk, she said when he opened his mouth to reply. This morning, after you left, I talked to him, told him that he shouldn't act so cold around us, that we're only trying to help him. And when I told him that you were beginning to genuinely care about him. You told him that, yes, and suddenly, well, I suddenly felt him close up more, and he told me, don't. And when I asked him why in Corellia's 9 hells why not, he simply said, because anyone who's ever cared about me has ended up dead. He said that, word for word. Luke, he hates himself, he's blaming himself for something, but I don't know why. When Jaina and Jason came to see us, he ipped off by himself to one of our guest bedrooms and hasn't come out yet. He's been brooding, and force help me, If he goes on like this for much longer, I may just take him through a training session that would make a Jedi Master cry. Luke had to hide a grin at his wife's exasperation. It was a proven fact that Mara Jade Skywalker had very little patience when it came to moodiness, especially and it was accompanied with teenage attitude. Well, I'll go speak to him, he assured her. And no, I don't think we're hurting him, not in the long run. Remember, if he keeps it all bottled up inside, it'll just make it worse. We've just got to draw him out bit by bit until he's recovered. Quite the psychologist, aren't you, Skywalker? She asked sarcastically, but he thought he sensed her untense a little, calmed by his words. I've got to be, with you as my wife, he replied, and quickly sprang back with a laugh as she realized what he'd said and swiped at him. He was pleased that he had made her smile, though. Grinning innocently at her as she sat back in her seat, he shrugged his cloak off and headed back to the sleeping quarters, where he felt the Force shifting restlessly. He walked quietly into the first bedroom, the guests, and discovered that Harry was seated in the windowsill, looking out on the planet's city. He glanced at Luke, but did not speak. The Jedi took it to mean that he was to make the first move. It was harder than he expected. Even with experience as a father, Luke was not sure exactly how to approach this finicky, skittish teenage boy without making a wrong move. Mara told me you've taken refuge here, he said softly, walking forward into the dark. When Harry made no move or indication to reply, he sighed and decided for the direct approach. There is no use in hiding, Harry. Does it ever do any good? What makes you think I'm hiding? Harry replied after a long moment of silence, but there was no bristling attitude in his speech like there had been before. Now there was merely a bone-worry ache, echoing loss and confusion. And suddenly Luke realized why the boy was bothering him, what it was he had felt the Force telling him. This boy, no, he corrected himself. Young man had seen and done things that no child his age should ever have to see or do. Harry's behavior, when not rude anyway, reminded him eerily of fighter pilots or ground ops who had seen battle before and become used to it. And worse, accepted it as normal. He remembered witnessing young men he led during Rogue Squadron who had turned into hardened warriors after witnessing their first battles because there was no other way to survive it. Harry had seen death firsthand. Had perhaps been the cause of it. Because I've seen men older than you hide to escape reality, he said softly. When they've lost someone, how many times had he wanted to just hide from life for a little after leaving Tatooine as a 19-year-old kid? He'd lost count. Harry stiffened, and he knew he was right. I know how you feel, Harry. No, you don't, the boy said shortly, and his tone was cold, freezing with a sudden flare of rage, and Luke felt the Force light up with his fury. You have no idea what I've been through, what I've done. You've lost someone and you think it's your fault. The boy's mouth clicked shut, and he turned to Luke in a mix of astonishment and anger and suspicion. If you've been reading my mind, I don't need to use the Force at all around you, Luke said, a mite impatiently. I know what it feels like to deal with the guilt of losing someone you loved and thinking you were the one responsible. He paused, but could tell that Harry was still listening, his anger cooled a little by his curiosity. He took a deep breath, preparing to talk about the earliest tragedy he could recall. I can understand what it feels like to suddenly be driven away from everything you once knew and loved. When I was 19, my aunt and uncle were harmed for 2 droids that I had with me. Luke nodded. Yes, he found it difficult to speak of, even after all this time. My mother died in childbirth. We never have discovered who she was. And my father, he left. He never came back, except when he chased me around the galaxy when discovering my existence. He believed that my sister and I had died with our mother. He looked curiously at Harry. You lost your parents, harm, as well. When I was 1, Voldemort defeated them trying to get to me. And that was the conversation, except for a few more minutes of questions, but they were unimportant as, suddenly, both of them realized they could understand each other. And Harry, somehow, felt a little better knowing that the man standing in the doorway seemed to really understand, both about being guilty in the deaths of others and of having lost his parents. 2 days later, Ben came home from flying drills with the squadrons. At 14, he was a red-headed boy with a less than average height and a slender, wiry frame built from his years of training as a Jedi apprentice. He had his father's blue eyes and cleft chin, but his mother's red hair and sharp tongue, which made family arguments interesting. Walking into the family headquarters, he immediately sensed something was off. Not dangerous, just tense and careful. He frowned. Maybe his mother was in one of her moods. But he quickly dismissed the thought. When his mother was caught up in the past, she drew away from him in the Force so as to not affect him. Besides, when she was like that, the air itself seemed to thrum with restrained energy. This was a sad sense he could feel through the Force. "Mom, Dad," he called. It was too quiet as well. Usually they had something on, whether it was the holocam or the latest news. Now there was nothing. He was just preparing to call again, when suddenly his dad came around the corner of the hall, wearing his usual fatigues, but he looked unusually grim, although that vanished seeing his son. "Well, if you want me to, I can just leave," Ben replied, smirking when seeing his dad roll his eyes. "Of course we don't want you to leave," Luke said in slight exasperation, clearly cursing his son's cheekiness. And that was when Mara came into view. "Ben," she exclaimed, smiling, and as always drew him into a hug. Ben grinned into his mother's shoulder. Whatever he said on the contrary. He really did miss his parents when he left, whether it was sharing a grin with his dad or taking in his mother's scent. But that odd heaviness bothered him. "What's wrong, Dad?" he asked as Mara drew back. "He had been tortured and hurt badly, so your mother and I took him in. And he's the one causing this whole depressive mood, i.e., trying to keep his mouth from dropping." "Who is he?" So Ben found himself walking down the hall to the guest bedroom 15 minutes later. He frowned to himself, still confused from his parents' explanation, but his curiosity was getting the better of him again. And he couldn't resist meeting this newcomer. Slowly, he pushed open the door of the room and blinked in surprise when seeing the guest had not turned a light on. It was dark, except for the light coming from the windows. Soon, however, his eyes adjusted so that he was able to make out a figure stretched out on the bed. He cleared his throat in a way of introducing his presence, and with startling swiftness the motionless figure was suddenly very alive, leaping from his former position and standing all in one smooth motion. "Who's there?" came a low, dangerous voice. The fatigue in this boy's Force aura had fled in the face of level-headed calm, and it made Ben slightly nervous. This was what his mother felt like when she was ready to attack. But he calmed himself. "I'm a resident of this house, so I'd really like it better if I wasn't threatened in it," he answered coolly. There was a slight shifting in the other's stance, but he was still poised to protect himself. "You're Ben, aren't you? Luke and Mara's son." "Yeah." Ben untensed slightly. "Is it all right if I turn on a light? Mom and Dad told me about you. I'd like to talk." There was a short pause, of tense silence, then, "I suppose." As Ben moved to do so, he frowned to himself. The voice was young, the tone not yet having deepened completely, and the accent was utterly foreign, clipped and stressed. It sounded sophisticated. Almost like his own Coruscant accent. As the lights switched on, he again blinked in surprise. They were old, tired eyes, aged beyond their years, haunted by the past. Looking at Harry Potter now, Ben realized that he looked similar to Luke did when his dad came home struggling with some inner demon of his past. A 15-year-old kid shouldn't look like this, Ben thought to himself. He shouldn't look like he's 30. That was for adults to look like, not a teenager. But teenagers often look that way, Ben reminded himself. Like his father had 3 days ago, he began to realize that Harry, whoever he was no stranger to death, and Ben wondered what he had seen or done to make him seem so cold and tired. Harry was looking at him carefully, studying his features, and finally said, "You look like Ron." His Force aura darkened with a pang of sadness. "Except he's taller." "Ron?" Ben asked, hoping that this was a safe opening for a conversation. "Ron Weasley," Harry replied quietly. "He's my best mate." "What, like a wing mate?" Now it was Harry's turn to be confused as he struggled to understand Ben's question. Finally, though, he realized what Ben was thinking. "Oh no," he said, snorting softly at the thought. "No, he's my best friend." "You have a best friend, don't you?" Surprisingly, Ben had to think about the answer to that question. Did he actually have any really good friends? Ones he missed when not around them, people who made him laugh and he could hang around with. No, he answered truthfully. I have friends, but not best friends, although my aunt. She always said I'd have gotten along really well with my cousin Anakin. Anakin. Harry frowned. Where did that name come from? Is it a star? No. Ben sat on the second bed in the room and watched as Harry, still tense, sat down on the one opposite him. He was named after my grandfather Anakin Skywalker. Naming my cousin Anakin was Aunt Leia's way of making peace with my grandfather. Make peace. Harry was becoming more confused. What do you mean by that? But to hear Harry ask who Anakin Skywalker essentially was and who had been, was unheard of. Everyone knew who Anakin Skywalker was and who he had ultimately become. He was my grandfather, he explained carefully. But I never knew him. My dad didn't know him. Anakin Skywalker was a Jedi like my dad, during the last few years of the Old Republic. But only a few days before Dad and Aunt Leia were born, grandfather turned to the dark side. He was Darth Vader, a Sith Lord, for over 20 years. My grandmother died shortly after giving birth, and Dad and Aunt Leia were separated at birth. My aunt became Leia Organa, Princess of Alderaan, and my dad was raised as a moisture farmer on Tatooine. Harry's eyes had brightened with surprise and honest curiosity. And they didn't know any of this, I take it? He asked dryly. For him, his previous conversation with Luke was making more sense. My mother died in childbirth. And my father left. He never came back. Now he could understand the hesitancy Luke had spoken with, the old hurt that he could clearly see had risen with the words. And he thought he had had a bad childhood. While Luke had been struggling with a mother and father he had never known, and not knowing that his father had gone dark. He shivered to himself, suddenly almost glad that he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that both James and Lily Potter were actually dead and not living as dark wizards. Ben shook his head. No, they didn't meet until they were both 19. That's a long story. He almost shook his head in disbelief. This story was all in the history books. Maybe Harry was from another world. Anyway, they fought together in the Galactic Civil War against the Empire, which Vader had helped put into power. At the end of the war, both Vader and the Emperor Palpatine died, but Dad was able to redeem Vader at the end. Aunt Leia spent a long time angry at Vader's memory, but she was able to finally forgive him. That's why she called my cousin, Anakin. He shrugged, then decided to change the subject. But tell me, how'd you get here? Where are your parents? Harry's eyes hardened suddenly, and his face iced over. My parents were harmed when I was 1, he said roughly. Ben stared at him. Of all the answers possible, that had not been one he had been expecting. I was raised by non-magic folk all my life. I didn't find out that I was a wizard until I was 11. Luke and Mara probably told you I can do magic. Ben nodded. At the age of 11, all children who can perform magic can go to Hogwarts. A school that teaches them how to control their abilities. I was finishing my 5th year. There, he continued quietly, and his force aura grew colder. There's a man after me in that world. A maniac Dark Lord who calls himself Voldemort. He managed to capture me. He shifted uncomfortably, and Ben felt guilt well up in the other boy. He tortured me and finally executed me by making me go through with a death veil at the Ministry of Magic. Ben sat frozen on the bed. So much information. There was so much he didn't understand. Who was this, Voldemort? How was he a Dark Lord? Was he anything like the Sith? What was this death veil that Harry talked about? And why was Harry feeling so guilty? You said this Voldemort guy defeat you? He asked, struggling to keep his voice neutral. It wasn't working. With a veil. Harry snorted wryly. It was believed in my world that the veil was a direct link to the afterlife, he explained, and his voice cracked even as he said it. Ben had the feeling that Harry had lost someone from it. Harry was feeling a guilt Ben sometimes sensed from his own dad, a guilt by feeling as if they were to blame for the death of someone. His suspicion was proven correct when, at Ben's questioning look, Harry said in a near whisper, Voldemort tricked me into going to the Ministry, specifically to the Department of Mysteries. My godfather, Sirius Black, came to help me and my friends, and he fell through the veil. He had lost family, clearly someone very close to him. Now Ben understood the guilt. He expected Harry to go, on with his story, but it became very clear that he was done with explanations. Instead, he ran a hand distractedly through his unruly hair, and then Ben saw it. It was a scar, previously hidden by his black bangs, shaped like a lightning bolt, looking red and angry against the milky white of his W. He began in surprise, but Harry, having realized where his attention was, flattened his hair over it, his face darkening again. "It was Voldemort's doing," he said roughly. Ben stared at him. "How?" "All right," Ben said, reining in his curiosity. There'd be time to get the whole story later. He shrugged carelessly and asked, "So, have you started looking for your godfather?" Harry froze. "Looked for?" he repeated incredulously. Ben nodded. "Yeah, you said you were sent through the same veil that he was. If you found yourself here on Coruscant, shouldn't he have come here as well?" Harry blinked. "It just seems too easy," he said after a long moment of contemplation. "How do we even know he came here? The veil could have dropped him off anywhere." "Actually, portals are exact creatures," Ben corrected him, glad he had been paying attention in his classes. "They don't move from planet to planet. Your godfather was probably dropped on some other part of Coruscant, but the portal couldn't have jumped to, say, Tatooine." He shook his head. "No, if he went through the veil, he's here somewhere." But Harry shook his own head. "He might be here," he disagreed, "but this planet is so big and so full of people that you'll never find him." The heavy bitterness, even despair, in his voice told Ben he believed what he had just said completely. But Ben stood up, unwilling to allow Harry to wallow in self-pity and bitterness anymore. "Hey, you're talking to a Jedi here," he said confidently. "I'm sure if we at least try to look, we'll find him. I'm sure Dad wouldn't be against sending a few of us to look for this guy." Now Harry looked at him, and abruptly all of the iciness of his expression dropped away as he seemed to dare to hope. He looked young like that, much more like his 15 years, than he ever had before. "You think so?" he asked. "Oh yeah." Ben held out a hand and pulled Harry to his feet, grinning. "Come on, we'll go talk to my dad about it." "So do you think we could look for him, then, Dad?" Ben asked 20 minutes later. He and Harry stood in Luke's study, who sat at his desk with a small stack of holocubes in front of him. He had listened attentively as his son had explained everything to him and then proposed sending Jedi to look for Harry's missing godfather. Now, he frowned thoughtfully and looked up at his son. "Do you believe we can find this man, Ben?" His son nodded. "Yes," he answered immediately. "It might take us a little while, but I think we can." Ben smiled, excited. "Yes, Master," he said, and looked at Harry with reassurance before bowing and leaving the room. Luke watched his son leave, not bothering to hide his own fond smile. Ben was incredibly intelligent, much more so than his father. He sighed to himself, feeling suddenly old, and then realized that Harry had not followed his son. Instead, the boy was standing very nearly in the corner, alert and observing. But his Force presence was thrumming with confusion and hope and betrayal. Luke blinked. The tang of betrayal was faint and mixed with the confusion, and it was not as bitter as his anger from days before, but it was still unnerving. "Harry," he asked softly. The boy met his gaze. "Why didn't you tell me?" Luke frowned, confused, even as his spine seemed to shiver with foreboding. "What?" Harry's mouth jerked, almost in a grimace. "Why didn't you tell me the truth about your father?" Luke almost jerked back with the bluntness of the question, and for a split second he was remembering a similar question stated nearly 40 years before. "Why didn't you tell me? You told me Vader betrayed and harmed my father." Luke took a deep breath and firmly pushed aside the memories. At least he knew what was bothering Harry, though. "Ben told you about Anakin Skywalker, I take it." At Harry's nod, he sighed again. "You must understand, Harry, the subject of my father and what he became, what atrocities he committed as Darth Vader, are still stuff of horror in the galaxy. To be honest, I was afraid you would be, well, not frightened, but wary of me and my family if you found out now that you are being housed by perhaps the most dangerous family in all of Coruscant. I did not want you to think you had to be wary of us. Besides," and here he paused for a minute, then pushed on. "Talking about Darth Vader is never easy." Harry nodded slowly, and Luke sensed the sense of betrayal in his Force presence ease. I can understand, he muttered. I just don't like people lying to me. Harry's mouth quirked up into a smile. I suppose, he agreed. What does he look like? Kip Duran asked. He sat fully alert and nearly eager in his master's chair, looking at Harry intently. They all were. Even Jaina was silent, and willing to listen to what the masters were being told, but maybe that was because it had been Ben's idea in the first place. Whatever the reason, Luke was just pleased that she was giving the boy the benefit of the doubt. Well, Harry trailed off, almost surprised by the question. He had never really thought about it before. Sirius was simply Sirius, in his mind. He's tall, maybe 6 foot, with long black hair. He likes wearing it long. He has gray eyes and his face, well, his face is thin and has a wasted look to it. He paused, trying to recall anything else that might help the Jedi find his godfather faster, and couldn't think of anything except, he'll probably still think he's on the run from the law, so he may be either hiding or running around as a dog. A dog. Sigil, the Jedi Council's master healer, blinked her round, bulbous eyes, clearly baffled by what Harry meant by a dog. Seeing her confusion, something mirrored more or less in the eyes of the other masters, Harry realized that they must not have creatures such as that in this universe. It made him curious to see what kind of animals they did have. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize a dog is the name of a type of animal from my world. They can be pets. My godfather can turn into one. See, so you may have to keep your eyes open for that, too. What does this creature look like? Kyle Katarn spoke up from beside Tressina Lobi. Like all the masters there, he was not, perhaps, completely at ease with the 15-year-old, but willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. After all, besides the anger and moodiness that they all felt from Harry, they could not sense any true darkness about him. Well, if he's going around as a dog, you'll see him as 4-legged. Covered completely with black fur. Dogs all have snouts, but Sirius's dog has a long, thin snout. He'll have a tail, and usually when he runs you'll see his tongue. Dogs like to run like that. Harry felt very surreal. Who needed the appearance of a dog explained to them? It was then, more than any other moment, that it finally hit him that this world was very little like his own, if something he took utterly for granted was utterly foreign for these people. Mara took pity on him. Is that all you can tell us? She asked, just to be sure. He nodded. Yeah, I'm sorry I can't tell you anything else. You've told us enough, Luke assured him. He looked at the other masters. Now, this will undoubtedly take us some time, but I think if we send out a couple teams each day, continually switching, I think we can search by sections for our missing refugee. And for anyone who finds him, just remember he can do magic, and probably better than Harry did. The masters all looked at Harry thoughtfully at those words, and he felt himself flush when he realized how much he must have knocked them all around that day. I suppose I should apologize for that, he muttered, still very red in the face. And looked down at his feet, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. I really didn't mean to do that, I just freaked out, Kip supplied helpfully. There was a long silence. Then, yeah, Harry agreed, still refusing to look up at them. Jaina rolled her eyes with a slight smile, finding his embarrassment amusing. Although she really didn't care for him, she had to admit that when it came down to it, Harry was a darn good fighter. I had bragging rights, having taken on the best Jedi Masters there were. Well, Kip smirked, no harm done, kid. I'm sure that was a one-time thing, anyway. We'd be ready for you this time. His words coaxed a smile from the boy, finally, and a real one. I'd like to see that. Hey, I'm sure that if you could get some training in, you could give us a good fight. But for right now, actually, Skywalker, Mara said, suddenly eyeing Harry thoughtfully, I think Master Duran just gave us a fantastic idea. Everyone halted in whatever they were doing and simply stared at Mara. It was a very rare thing indeed that Mara Jade Skywalker spoke of anything Kip Duran's as a good idea, so now she had just thrown them all. Even Luke was looking at her in amazement. She smirked, knowing how badly she had just confused them, and looked at Harry again, who felt very self-conscious very suddenly. What idea is that? He asked nervously. Her smile widened. Training you, of course. What? Several of the masters demanded at once, even Kip. But Luke, having caught onto his wife's train of thought, simply grinned. Mara looked at them all. Not training him as a Jedi. Of course, but we could still instruct him in hand-to-hand combat and such, maybe even teach him to fly a ship. If we end up finding his godfather, he could still be taught his magic. But we'd be teaching him control and finesse. He does need to learn control, Cam Solusar agreed slowly. There were nods from every side. This one Believez, you are right, Saba Sabaton, one of the Barabel Jedi, said. Her deep, gravelly voice caused Harry to jump in surprise, and she hissed softly in amusement. This one is sorry, Harry Potter. This one did not mean to startle you. It's okay, he said. And the Jedi could sense him pulling himself together, pushing aside his surprise and even fear to focus on Mara. Is that really necessary? He asked nervously. Dee said the magic words when talking about Voldemort. Even the most dubious of the masters knew that Harry needed help to defeat the Dark Lord after him, and if their training could do that, very quickly they all agreed to Mara's idea. Finally, Luke looked at Harry, suddenly quite serious, and Harry knew what was going to happen next. So, Luke said quietly, we have all agreed to your training, Harry. But we have a question for you before we can begin it. Yes, Harry asked, and they couldn't help but notice his eagerness. In order to begin, we should return your weapon, your wand, to you. Before we do so, however, we must have your word that you will not use it to escape, and you will not use it against anyone. If you agree to this, you are agreeing that you are still in our care, and we will not take it lightly if you break this promise. Yes, sir, the boy replied, and he had no way of knowing that all of the masters were focusing on him, looking for any trace of a lie in his words. They found none. I promise I won't do anything of the kind. It had been agreed that Harry's godfather would be looked for, and Luke had immediately sent out 2 different teams of a master and their apprentice, to be switched every half day with 2 fresh teams. Then they had finished up with other requests and issues the order was facing, and then they were dismissed. Harry was waiting outside with Ben, who was very pleased that his idea had been approved, and hopeful that this would raise Harry's spirits. I just hope this isn't some wild goose chase, Harry said quietly, not allowing his hope to grow too much. Considering his luck, they'd never find Sirius. We'll try our hardest, Harry, Ben said, determined not to allow his companion to sink into melancholy. Harry had better things to do than simply sit around feeling sorry for himself, and Ben certainly was not going to stand for feeling all of that from him the entire time he was at home. Once back at the Skywalker apartment, Luke sent Ben and Harry off to do some errands. He could sense that Ben would be a good thing for Harry's staying here, and hoped his son would make friends with the wayward boy. Then he turned to Mara. All right, my love, he said. You had another reason to ask for Harry's training. What was it? She looked up at him with a mischievous look. My, Skywalker, she said, you're quite blunt today, aren't you? Yes, I had another reason, she added when he opened his mouth. You've sensed how unsure of himself Harry is, how unconfident he feels. He doesn't really know who he is right now. I thought maybe his training and being sent out with our Jedi on missions later would help him discover who he is, and give him a confidence boost. Force knows he can't face the Dark Lord after him like this. Luke grinned at the face of his wife's argument. Logical. I always am, she replied, putting on a very self-arrogant air as she said it, and then she laughed and they shared a quick kiss. You were right, Skywalker, he just needs some help. The Force guided him to us for a reason. And you didn't say any of this to the Council, why, exactly? I wanted to astound you with my wisdom. I'm sure astounded. Watch it, farm boy. I may go full-blown Jedi Master on you. Something had shifted. She didn't know what, she didn't know how, but something had definitely shifted. The news had reported that Harry Potter was missing, and now there were rumors that you know who had defeated him. It was only a matter of time before the wizarding world would be attacked by the Death Eaters. But something had changed. Harry Potter wasn't missing, he was gone. Simply gone. She couldn't sense him like she had before, like she could somehow sense everyone else. No, Harry's presence was just missing from, it seemed, the fabric of the universe itself. Or at least from this universe. It was a troubling thought, and one she would keep to herself until she figured some of it out. It felt wonderful, gloriously so, To have his wand back in his hands. He had felt vulnerable without it, and he realized that that had made him even more edgy and nervous than usual, but now that he had it back, some of that unease had eased. He tried to tell himself it was only because he had never not had it with him before, but the truth was that there was still some part of him that did not trust these people who had taken him in. He knew that most of them still didn't trust him. No, the Jedi Kip Duran exclaimed. If you try to shift that way, you leave your whole right side vulnerable to your attacker. The Jedi stood before him in one of the training rooms of the temple, instructing the young wizard in some forms of hand-to-hand combat because, as Master Skywalker had so aptly put it, it was better to have a physical edge than nothing at all. Harry, however grudgingly, could see why. He had always wondered why several wizards didn't seem to care about being in shape, besides Aurors of course. What if they lost their wands during a fight? But did that mean that he could have his butt handed to him by these Jedi to prove that point? Breathing heavily, he glared hotly up at Master Duran from where he lay on the floor. This was the third time he had found himself dumped unceremoniously onto the floor of the training floor, and to be frank, he was getting sick of it. Quote, maybe if you actually showed me how I wouldn't have trouble with it, he said through clenched teeth, and his hands were itching to curse the Jedi Master silly. His temper was rising, and he knew that probably wouldn't be a good thing for any more upcoming fights. Master Duran looked down at him coolly. Experience is the best teacher, kid, was all he said. And that was what made Harry's temper snap. He was being called a kid. He clambered to his feet, ignoring his aching muscles and heavy lungs, and met the Jedi's gaze full on. Look, Master Duran, he said, trying not to be too disrespectful. This isn't teaching me anything, nothing at all. I know you've been the one appointed to teach me this, but that doesn't mean that you have the right to kick me around like this. Not learning anything, I don't. Muscle memory, kid, the Jedi said, still smirking. Your mind may not have picked up on it, but your body sure did. Your brain's getting in the way, making you think too much. He backed up a pace. You did pretty good on that last try, though, except for your footwork. Come on, time to work on your feet. He met Ben walking down the hallway of the temple after Master Duran had told him he could leave. Limping, actually. It was a good limp, though, one that the Jedi Master had said he should feel proud about. You earned that limp, kid. He supposed he did, but he really didn't want to become black and blue every time he was taught something. Ben simply grinned seeing him but didn't say anything about it, although Harry did notice the redhead cert. Ainley walked slower than he usually did with him. I was just coming to see if you were close to being done with Kip, actually, he was saying. You wanna go check out some more of the lessons we have here? It looked new. What happened here, Ben? He finally asked, unable to help his curiosity. Why does this place look like it's been rebuilt? He wasn't expecting Ben to falter slightly, but he did. There was a very quick pause to his step that gave away his surprise of the question, and Harry thought he saw the teenager's eyes close off just a bit. After a long moment, however, he turned to Harry, and the graveness of his expression caught the young wizard off guard. Ben sighed heavily. So many people died in that war, Harry. We don't even have all the numbers added up yet, but we know that they're in the billions. The Vong would tear up whole planets, reverse their ecosystems and defeat anyone too young or too old to enslave. And they defeat so many of us, as Jedi. We probably lost a fourth of our numbers in that war. My cousin Anakin, my uncle's best friend, Chewbacca. You met my cousin Jason, right? Harry nodded. He'd been captured by the Vong at one point, tortured by them and enslaved. He actually developed something he calls a Vong sense, where he could sense them and even communicate to the creatures the Vong had with them. Harry blinked, stopping. Really? He see. Old remember how much Jason had smiled and joked during his visit with Jaina at the Skywalker apartment, and he wouldn't have guessed that he had once been taken prisoner and tortured. But now that he thought about it, he recalled a quiet seriousness deep in the man's eyes that could not have been brought about except through a tragedy or bad experience. Ben nodded. I wouldn't joke about that. But he escaped with the help of Vergier, a Jedi Master who was well, I guess she was a double agent, pretending to be on the side of the Yuuzhan Vong while really working from the inside. Don't worry about Jason, he's okay now. Well, as okay as he can be. None of them have gotten over Chewie's or Anakin's deaths. I know they all have nightmares about the war still. And my dad was poisoned in the final battle, so he still has trouble with that sometimes. Jedi Skywalker, she said. Mr. Potter. Ben inclined his head respectfully. Master Solo, he replied. Jaina nodded and walked past them, but as she did so she looked at Harry. And again he thought she was sizing him up. Judging him. He bit down on the irritation he could feel building up again and forced himself to look away and not mow. They until the sound of her footsteps faded again. Ben grinned again. Don't let Jaina intimidate you, he said. She doesn't trust very easily. She's too much like Uncle Han sometimes. Harry blew out a frustrated breath. What did I ever do to her? Ben shrugged, but there was something far too sly in his gaze for Harry's liking. You like her, don't you? He said suggestively with a smirk. What? No. Harry shook his head violently. His mouth almost falling open with disbelief. Why would I? Ben merely continued to grin at him, and finally he flushed. Well, I guess she's not bad looking. Ben laughed at him all the way down the hallway. The loud bustle of a large group of people woke Harry up early the next morning long before he was ready to be awake. Coruscant's sun was already high. And its light shining through the cracks of the window shade, right into his face. Groaning, he turned over and burrowed deeper into his covers, trying to shut off its obnoxious brightness. He could do something about that, yes. But he found he couldn't do anything about the noise outside. Was it Jason and Jaina again, visiting? But as he listened with half-perked ears, he realized that there was not only Luke and Jason's voices, but a third that he didn't recognize. Darn his curiosity. He sat up in the bed in the guest bedroom and pulled himself to his feet, trying to rid his eyes of their drowsiness. He pulled on some decent clothes for guests and pulled the door open, walking barefooted on the carpet as he made his way to the living room. The woman beside him was nearly a foot shorter than him. With light graying brown hair that she held up in a braid and fine, shapely features, she held herself high as well, something he saw that she was doing instinctively. He wondered if she as royalty of some sort, if she held herself in such a way, like she had been taught to stand in such a way. Or maybe she was in the army, like Jaina seemed to be. It was clear that Jaina took after her mother in looks, although the former still seemed a little softer and her eyes larger. Mara smirked. We have to wait for our son to drag himself out of bed, she replied dryly. Come on. The man spoke now. He slouched beside his wife and Harry saw that he had a gun strapped to his leg in a holster. The kid needs to sleep in, catch up on his sleep. Force knows he's not getting to sleep in flying with the squadrons. Luke snorted and the man met his gaze with a smirk of his own, the two of them sharing some well-remembered experience. Mara noticed. Leia, I think we'd better intervene before our husbands go off walking down memory lane. The woman addressed as Leia nodded, but she was smiling. You know how the two of them get talking about the rebellion. Like a couple of grandfathers living the olden days again. Hey, the man cried good-naturedly. You callin' us old, your worship. Your hair's pretty gray now too, if you haven't noticed. With you as my husband I can't see why it wouldn't be, Leia retorted. But like her husband her tone held no spite. Luke hid a smile behind his hand and hastily turned a laugh into a cough. Oddly enough it was Leia who noticed their eavesdropper. Whether it was from just feeling his eyes upon her or if she was using the Force, Harry couldn't say, but it didn't even really matter anyway. She saw him standing by the door and her eyes widened slightly in surprise. One fine eyebrow rising curiously. You didn't tell us you had a guest, Luke. The Jedi Master dropped his hand and looked at her innocently. We didn't want to interrupt your vacation at Corellia. He replied simply. It was your first real vacation in. Between the Yuuzhan Vong, Dark Jedi, and the Senate we haven't had a real vacation, she sighed, nodding, but still her attention turned back to Harry. But you still haven't answered my question, brother. It's not often you bring in strangers. He's hardly a stranger anymore. Mara smiled wryly, and motioned Harry over. Security found him lost and confused down in the lower levels and brought us in when he fought them off. Harry felt himself redden, and opened his mouth to say that Mara was exaggerating. But stopped under the sudden appraising gaze of the woman. He had the feeling that this was a woman you did not want to cross. He was inexplicitly reminded of Professor McGonagall, and the thought both calmed him and heightened his anxiety. She looked him up and down, slowly and carefully, and he thought he could see a certain level of dubiousness in her eyes, clearly wondering how a small young teenager like himself could fight against Coruscant security. The man was looking at him with open admiration, as if fighting the law was something to be proud of. "Harry," Luke said, "quiet's my twin sis. Chair Leia Organa Solo and her husband Han Solo." "Leia, Han, this is Harry Potter." And yes, Mara wasn't lying. "But, it's a long story, Leia. You'll want to sit down for it." It seemed no time at all and everything was told. Harry sat between Mara and Luke, almost as if the two Jedi were afraid that he would get up and run away if he had the choice. Leia and Han sat across from them with Jacen and Jaina on individual settees merely listening to the story. Jacen, having not been there for the actual happenings, listened to everything as intently as his parents did, even if he had already heard it told once. Jaina sat with crossed legs and arms, careful to keep from looking at Harry, who had the irritating sense that she still didn't believe him. Leia was looking between the two Skywalkers, as if she wasn't sure to believe them either. But she simply sat quietly for a moment, clearly processing all that she had been told. Han sat slouched into the cushions of the sofa, a curious smirk on his face. But oddly enough he didn't seem to be disbelieving of what had just been explained. Leia's first question, however, was unexpected. "Have you looked for a way home?" Harry straightened, unconsciously frowning. He hadn't really thought about finding a way home yet, what with everything going on already. Anyway, he was training with the Jedi now and that would undoubtedly take months, maybe even years. "I think we're just making sure I can survive if I do get back right now," he said, a mite wryly, and Han's mouth twitched ever so slightly. Leia's brow rose again, but then she nodded slowly, deliberately, clearly mulling over his words and finding nothing to gainsay. She did look undeniably saddened, however, as she sat back. "Do teenagers have to fight for their lives and their freedom in every universe?" she asked rhetorically. Mara snorted. "Jedi Master talk, huh? Always philosophical and vague, and never getting anywhere with anything they say." "And yet you're a master too," Han replied with a smirk of his own. "Sith spit." While Han and Jacen laughed at the red-haired woman's exclamation, Leia turned to Luke. "And you're busy looking for his godfather?" "Yes. Any ideas where he is?" Harry interjected. "Luke has several different teams of Jedi going out each day to search. Ben said that portals are precise, so he's still on planet somewhere." "Have you got Zek checking the lower levels?" Luke hesitated. "The lower levels have changed a lot since the Yuuzhan Vong invaded, Leia. I'm not sure if Zek would be able to recognize them well anymore. Not to mention the several different creatures that still live down there." Leia sighed. "I know. We're still receiving reports that citizens die almost every day from the poisons they're injected with." She saw Har-Rai suddenly pale and could have cursed at her stupidity. "I'm sure your godfather is fine, Harry." "Did you say godfather?" Jacen's voice caused them all to look at him, and he almost recoiled from several different sets of piercing looks cast his way. He rallied quickly, however, and looked back. "Harry," he began slowly, "you said your godfather was here somehow. Was he a taller man with gray eyes and long black hair?" Harry almost gaped at him. "How did you?" "I think I met him on my travels." "What?" Jacen looked at him seriously. "It was about 8 months ago. I was leaving the sport of one of the Outer Rim planets when a man came up and asked for a lift. He seemed bedraggled and a little wild-eyed but sincere enough. He said he'd left Coruscant months before but needed to go back. I didn't ask any questions and only allowed him a ride. When we docked here he thanked me, I gave him some credits for food and clothes, and then he left. Said that if I needed anything I could find him. When I asked him why he was coming back to Coruscant he only said he felt he should." "Did he give you his name?" Harry asked eagerly, almost jumping up from his seat. His whole countenance suddenly flared with excitement and there was a light in his eyes that had not been there before. Jacen frowned as he tried to remember, and the whole room seemed to hold its breath in preparation for his reply. Then his expression cleared. "He told me it was Padfoot. Funny how that works, huh? Then I had to write this because I was in the mood." Sith spit, a SW word that literally means crap. So you're telling me that Jason knew where and who your godfather was this whole time? Ben's voice was a blend of disbelief, irritation, and elation. This whole time, and he didn't tell anyone. He didn't know, Ben. Harry replied patiently. He felt oddly touched that his new friend was so indignant on his behalf, but was mature enough to see Jason's side as well. Why would H.E. have thought that Padfoot was my godfather, or would have any relation to me? Jason had apologized profusely for not realizing anything sooner, but Harry had simply shrugged and waved the apology off, assuring him that everything was all right. Well, it would have saved us a lot of trouble, Ben grumbled good-naturedly. He and Harry sat on one of the benches in a training area outside the main building of the temple, waiting for one of the masters to come for Harry's training. Every week the several different masters traded off to give the young wizard more and more experience with combat. Just the other day he had finished his training with Corran Horn, who he rather liked. Corran was soft-spoken and clearly more of a pacifistic man than several of the others, but that didn't keep high from driving Harry into the ground with exhaustion if he felt like it. You had to respect a man like that. It was a beautiful warm day, bright and lively, and the sun felt glorious, but seated there in peace. Harry felt a sudden wave of sadness wash over him. What was going on at home right now? Were they still looking for him in the wizarding world, or had they finally given up? Had Voldemort started his war against the Ministry? Now that Harry had begun to recover from Voldemort's hurt, he felt angry and a little disgusted with himself. Why had he allowed himself to be beaten down so far? Why had he not stood up to him when faced with the veil? He had never allowed Voldemort to break him before, so why had he then? If you had let him defeat you, then there wouldn't be any hope now, Ben remarked suddenly. Harry sighed and looked over at him. Are you reading my mind again? Ben gazed back indignantly. I can't help it, he retorted. What with you broadcasting your thoughts like that for anyone to see them? Okay, sorry, Harry said hurriedly, wanting to keep things peaceful between them. They sat in a silence approaching awkward, with both of them simply staring at nothing. Then, I just don't like feeling like Voldemort won, he said angrily. He can't win. I know, Ben said, nodding. But if you had actually died instead of going through the veil, there wouldn't be any chance to go back now. But I thought the veil would defeat me anyway. Ben shrugged. Doesn't change the fact that it didn't. You still lived, you can still go back, and you can still kick that so-called Dark Lord's ass from Tatooine and back. Harry couldn't help but laugh, but couldn't deny the simple logic of Ben's words. He wondered idly what his friends back in the wizarding world would make of this smart-mouthed Jedi Padawan who spoke the truth in the simplest and bluntest terms. Hermione would probably be scandalized, and Ron would just laugh along. Footsteps from the doorway caught both of the boys' attention, and they looked over to find Luke himself striding over to meet them, dressed in a simple black tunic and trousers. Ben choked back a sympathetic laugh. Oh Force, you have Dad as a master today, he whispered, clear humor lacing his tone. I do not envy you at all. He stood and Harry followed suit, and the former bowed when Luke stopped before them. Master Skywalker, he said respectfully. I'll leave you two. Now, will I? Luke nodded silently, giving his son a small smile, and with a swift look at Harry, Ben was off the door in record time. Harry swore he heard the retreating figure laugh once inside, though, and he frowned as he turned back to Luke. There was something oddly distant in Luke's expression, almost like he was cutting himself off from emotion. Used to seeing the man otherwise made Harry a little uneasy, but he stifled his anxiety and instead focused on the here and the now. He was engaged in a teacher-student lesson now. Luke, however, remained silent, and instead slowly began to walk around him in a slow, deliberate circle. Harry had the feeling that he was being evaluated, and he suddenly negated the thought that Luke and Leia were nothing alike. Everything about the Jedi Master spoke poise and calm, and at almost intimidating levels. You feel inferior. Harry blinked, taken aback. What had Luke just said? What was going on? He thought he was going to be instructed on something, not evaluated and talked down to. He met the man's eyes, but the remote expression staring back at him told him nothing. You don't feel like you've done enough to save your world, Luke continued in that same soft tone. You're afraid you have abandoned it to the Dark Lord who was after you. Do you know why you feel like that, Mr. Potter? He suddenly stopped right in front of Harry, all movement so quickly stilled that the young wizard almost stepped back. It's because you are, he continued with a cold smile. You feel inferior because you are inferior. Harry felt anger start to thrum in his stomach at those words. What are you? You feel like you can't save anyone. You're right, you can't even save yourself. Why should anyone place their hope in such a small, thin boy? The Jedi Master was sounding like Snape, demeaning and snide, something he had never heard from Luke before, and it was making him more than irritated, it was making him angry. Call him small and weak, would he? I don't feel inferior, he ground out between clenched teeth. Then you're in denial. You have no control, you allowed your enemy to defeat you. You allowed everyone to walk over you. I wouldn't be surprised if your so-called friends only hung around you for the fame. My friends don't care about that. Harry began furiously, but again Luke caught him off. You're telling me that they never turned their backs on you. There was never a time when they left your side. Harry opened his mouth to say, no, he really did, but then he remembered the tournament in 4th year. And Ron had snubbed him for all those long months in his jealousy. And suddenly Harry found he couldn't say a word. Luke nodded. I thought as much. Poor boy played by those professing to be his friends and you don't even realize it. His smile could have frozen water. I wouldn't be surprised if your wretched mud of a godfather was doing the same. His final words snapped Harry's control, and with a strangled outcry of fury he lashed out, fully intending to hit the Jedi Master with everything he had. Control, he said simply. It's the most important thing in a fight. If you give your enemy any clue that they can control your emotions, then they have power over you. Luke helped him up into a sitting position. It takes a lot of practice, he continued. You have to be able to remember that what they say does not matter. They're only trying to hurt you with their words, looking for a hold on you. There was a definite rueful smile on his face now. Trust me when I say that that is one of the most important things to remember. I didn't, and it almost cost us everything against the Emperor. Harry pulled himself to his feet, nodding. All right, he smiled self-consciously. I feel like a fool. Luke nodded. A wise man once said, who's the more foolish? The fool or the fool who follows him? I think if any of the Padawans here take your example, then we can be concerned. And again Harry couldn't help but laugh, even if his backside and his pride were sore. Uncle Luke. Luke raised one eyebrow at his niece's protests, showing her he was not to be moved on his decision. She tried anyway. I don't want to train him, Uncle Luke. She exclaimed furiously, her brown eyes flashing. You have all of the other masters there helping him out, why do you need me too? He sighed. Jaina, I'm asking you to do this for me because everyone else has taken their turns instructing him. It's time for you to do your part as well. She huffed and looked away, crossing her arms stubbornly across her chest. Knowing she was close to saying no, Luke gently cupped her chin in his fingers and turned her gaze back to his. I know you don't like him. He's immature and annoying. Whatever you may think he is right now, Jaina, listen to me when I tell you that there will come a time when you'll be very thankful that he's here. Give him a chance, and give yourself a chance. Harry's going to be here for a long time and it won't get any easier between the two of you if you don't take that step. She sighed, her anger collapsing. Fine, she sighed, giving in. He smiled. Good. I'm going to give you a couple of days to think about what you want to show him, all right? Show him something extraordinary, something he won't ever forget. Jaina watched her uncle leave, still irritated but now thinking about what he'd said. Something extraordinary, something Harry wouldn't forget. Whatever it was, it wouldn't be hand-to-hand combat or even shooting. It should be something that was right up her alley, something she felt strongly about. And then it clicked, and she couldn't help but feel excited at the thought of what she could show him. For now, though, you'll just have to settle for finding Sirius in this chapter. Hope you enjoy. Are you sure he's here? Mara looked dubiously at her nephew, who stood looking at the sign hanging above the building. The Trooper's Gal. It seemed little more than a pub, and a seedy one at that, full of loud, boisterous people and a band playing in the background that made them both wince. Jason shrugged. This is where he'd likely be at, he replied, but there was a hesitancy to his voice that said that he was having second doubts. Personally, Mara didn't see how they'd find this Meister. IOUS Sirius Black here. There were millions of other places he could be, but she hoped she'd be wrong for Harry's sake. She hated to say it, but she really didn't want the kid to spiral back to the moody, depressing storm cloud he had been for so long, which he was finally acting less like every day. If he did, she might just have to slap him, and that really wouldn't do well with Harry opening up and trusting them. Besides, Skywalker really didn't support violence as a way to get over something. She just had to remind herself that if they couldn't find Sirius Black, Harry would be very disappointed. So Ben went back to the squadron, Jason remarked as they approached the entrance. Yes, he didn't want to, but he said he'd try to ask for leave. And he went because Jaina wanted his help with something, Jason said with a grin. Mara looked over at him in surprise. Really? What for? But her nephew's grin merely widened. Jaina said it's a surprise, he said mysteriously. Something to do with Harry's training. And don't bother asking Uncle Luke about it because he doesn't know yet, either. The bar was dimly lit and smelled heavily of smoke when they entered it. It was clearly a plaque. Where the dregs of society found refuge for illegal dealings. Mara wondered if this was the sort of place where Han had hung out in while on his own in Mayday. Mental note to ask him. Several people were dancing or lounging around tables, their voices loud and running together so that it was hard to think. Mara glanced at Jason, then tugged her hood hiding her long red hair down lower and made her way through the crowd, looking for anyone who resembled Harry's missing godfather. Jason gripped her arm for a moment. There, he said quietly, and motioned over to a table in the corner where a man sat nursing a drink by himself. Mara nodded and walked over slowly. Even when she reached the table, the man did not move or wince. She frowned, having second thoughts. Padfoot. Luke made his way into his and Mara's apartments late that night, having been at the Jedi Temple, and breathed a sigh of relief knowing that he was finally done with the bustle of the day. He knew that Mara and Jason were gone at the moment, but where was Aw? Hello, Harry. The said boy was seated on the couch, already dressed for sleep, and looking through a datapad. He had been looking through the history of the Old Republic and the Empire the past few weeks between lessons at the temple and meeting new people, and seemed very close to starting the rebellion. He liked to read, Luke had noticed, not obsessively, but enough. And he seemed almost childishly fascinated by the datapads and other technology that was all around him. He looked up from the section he was reading and grinned tiredly. Hello, Luke, he responded, and then went back to where he was reading. Luke allowed himself to grin. Regular reader. He took off his overcoat and took a seat beside him, and for a long moment they simply sat in comfortable silence. Then, Luke, surprised, the Jedi looked over to see Harry frowning down at the datapad. Yes, I've been reading a lot about Palpatine and I've seen a lot of mentionings of him being a Sith Lord. What it that, quote, Luke frowned. Well, that's actually a difficult thing to explain. A Sith Lord is like a corrupt version of a Jedi. We as Jedi draw from the light side of the Force using peace. Sith draw from the dark, drawing their powers from anger and aggression. Harry was silent for a long moment. Finally, however, he nodded slowly. Like Voldemort, I guess, he said. He seems to do the same thing. He certainly derives a lot of enjoyment from other people's suffering, he continued bitterly. Enough of that, Luke scolded him lightly. What's done is done. You can only focus on the here and the now. You can lose yourself in the past if you're not careful. He leaned a little closer to the young wizard, who was looking over at him in confusion. Keeping all this bitterness to yourself and hoarding it forever doesn't solve anything. It only makes you more miserable. And who knows, maybe someday you'll be able to even forgive this Voldemort for what he's done to you. Harry snorted. Fat chance of that, he replied. Harry. Mara's voice caused them both to jump and turn around. She was standing in the doorway, our long red hair falling down her back, and she was smiling widely. Harry stood, realizing what that smile meant, and for the first time wild hope lit up his face. You found him, he breathed. Mara moved aside in answer, revealing a tall, black-haired man with gray eyes and a wide, relieved smile that lit up his haggard, once handsome face. They moved at the same time, Godfather and Godson, and so quickly that neither Skywalker Was sure how they managed to get to the middle of the room in such a short amount of time. Before either Luke or Mara could quite believe it, they were witness to the biggest bear hug Coruscant had ever seen. But Harry shook his head. It doesn't matter, he said, swallowing down a hard lump in his throat. It just matters that you're found, so we don't have to worry about that. He tried to settle his tongue but wasn't able to, and he finally spoke aloud his biggest regret. Sirius, I'm sorry. The Ministry and the Battle God, how could I have been so stupid? Voldemort knew I'd go if you were there. I was thick enough to fall for it, and it got. He stumbled on the next words, it got you defeat. Whoa, hold it, Harry. Sirius interrupted, his grin fading into a frown of concern as his godson fought back tears. I'm right here. I'm still in one piece. I don't know what happened. All I remember is Bellatrix hitting me with that jinx and falling through that veil, and I found myself here wherever the heck here is. Coruscant, Harry replied, still struggling to keep from making a fool of himself. It's Coruscant, this place. I was found by this couple. Sirius, and he motioned to the Skywalkers, who walked forward. This is Luke and Mara Skywalker. The black-haired man greeted them with a nod and shook Luke's hand warily. Mara and I met already, he explained uselessly. Luke looked over at his wife with a sly smirk. Been introducing yourself as Mara, now? He asked. No. I'm Mrs. Skywalker. Mara rolled her eyes but still smiled. Sirius chuckled and Harry hid a grin. Wouldn't you like to know? Skywalker, she replied. Sirius looked at them carefully, sizing them up. You've been good to him? He asked, and it seemed almost a challenge. Perfectly, Sirius, Harry said. As a matter of fact, it was Luke and Mara's son who suggested that you were here somewhere. Wait, Sirius said. His face had darkened. Hold on, Harry, I just realized I got here by going through the veil. But if you're here, too, what happened? How'd you get here? Harry reluctantly told him of his capture and Voldemort's giving him the choice of dying, and of his decision to go through the veil. Sirius collapsed onto the couch, very pale. So in our world we're both dead, he said after a long moment. Harry nodded wearily, glancing over at Luke and Mara for a moment before turning back to his godfather. Yeah, I suppose we are. And yes, before you ask, Sirius, I'm okay now. Good, Sirius said faintly. Harry hesitated for a moment, shifted from one foot to the other. Sirius, I need to find out if there's some way to get back. I can't just let Voldemort gain power. I agree. Sirius stood again, ignoring Harry's taken aback look. He brushed his hair away from his face, looking every inch his name. Who knows? Maybe we'll be able to get back. Harry grinned slightly. I hope so. I need to try. And standing beside Luke, Mara looked over at her husband, and from the small, pleased smile on his face, she knew he was thinking the same thing she was. There you go, kid. Keep you focus on that and keep on going. Hello, Hedwig. The snowy white owl merely blinked her large amber eyes. But she was listening. Owls were, after all, very intelligent creatures. I know you miss Harry Potter. Do you suppose we can find him if we work together? Again the owl merely blinked. But she stretched her wings out as if shrugging. I'll take that as a yes, then. This chapter will pick up the pace a little, and then next chapter I think will finally reveal who it is who's looking for Harry, if you haven't already guessed. Enjoy. Hey, Potter. The familiar voice made Harry turn as he walked down the hall of the temple, and he frowned when seeing who it was. Jaina. She stopped beside him and crossed her arms. I've been needing to talk to you, she said. She wasn't even panting from her run. Uncle Luke said he wanted me to help with your training, right? He nodded. Yes, he said slowly, warily. She smirked as if sensing his unease. Relax, kid, she said. If I wanted to punch you or lay you out on the floor I would have already done that. The scary thing was that he could see her doing it, too. I just need to tell you to meet me and Ben at Docking Bay 21 after you're done here. Docking Bay 21 was where the squadron both the cousins were on stayed when they weren't on leave. Okay, he left it at that, not sure what to make of this sudden development. We'll knock you clean off your feet by the end of the day, Jaina said, and her smirk deepened. You'll never have another experience like this after you're done. And what does that mean? Let's just say that there are some fighter pilots who just can't handle being grounded after they've been to the stars. She replied mysteriously, and then she turned and was gone around the corner before he could even open his mouth. He blinked, thrown by this turn of events. But then he shook himself and, after a moment of hesitating, continued on his way. So you've built all of this after the Empire destroyed the Jedi? Sirius looked in interest at the temple, where he stood with Luke, who nodded. Yes, with no small amount of hard work and a lot of mistakes along the way. You look to be, that's because it's been nearly 40 years. Harry called across the courtyard. He and Kip Duran were sparring together. He dodged the Jedi's well-aimed fist and responded with a sweeping kick to the legs, which Kip lithely leapt over. The two of them were getting into it, Sirius noted with amusement. Both had equally competitive looks on their faces, grins that bespoke their excitement and the promise of defeat. They had been sparring like this for the past 20 minutes with only a short break, and by now both of them were drenched with sweat due to the heat of the day and the amount of moving they were going through. Yes, O Almighty One. His godson responded with a cheeky grin. It has been 40 years, Luke agreed, nodding at Harry's words. Long, difficult 40 years but worth it. The Jedi's numbers are climbing again. The Empire couldn't wipe us all away. They tried, came Harry's reply again, and Sirius laughed. Luke looked over at the young wizard. How far have you gotten in that history section anyway? He's been reading through the history of the Republic and the Empire and now the Rebellion. He explained in response to Sirius's confused look. He seems interested enough in reading about it. A thud and a muted grunt made them both look over to see Kip standing over Harry, who was sprawled unceremoniously on the ground. That's why you don't talk and pay more attention, Kip said with a triumphant smirk. Nevertheless, he reached out a hand and helped pull the wizard to his feet, who smiled ruefully. I'll beat you eventually, you know that, right? Oh yes, I'm sure my days are numbered, Kip retorted good-naturedly. He pushed Harry away from him with a laugh. Go wash all that sweat off you, kid. Can't have you smelling the rest of the day. Not to meet Jaina, Sirius said in a sing-song voice, and was rewarded with Harry flushing. There's nothing between us, I hope you know. Sirius, sure there isn't, pup. He's doing a lot better, Kip remarked as he sat down beside Sirius, watching Harry leave. He swept his wet bangs out of his eyes and nodded in satisfaction. The first time I tried to teach him something he ended up falling flat on his back. He's learning poise, Luke agreed, nodding. Control. It'll help when he's learning more spell work, Sirius added. One of the things Aurors have to learn is poise. Wand dueling isn't just standing there waving your wand, he said a little defensively when Luke and Kip both turned to look at him. We do move around a lot. Kip frowned to himself as if trying to figure out why you would have to move around. Luke merely nodded. Okay, so what do you want to show me? Harry looked over at Ben. Am I allowed? You'll need a flying permit, the redhead replied. But you won't actually be flying today, so you don't have to worry about that. Jaina just wants to show you the different instruments you need to know to fly. You'll be fine. Flying. Harry hadn't even thought about flying in this world, but now that he had the chance he couldn't help but feel excited. Sure, it wouldn't be like riding a broomstick, but it was still flying. He grinned. You won't hear me complaining. She was searching for Harry Potter daily, combing through the fabric of the universe just in case she had somehow missed him. She wasn't entirely sure how she could sense all the people around her like she did, but it was helping her now, and it was helping her realize that the one she looked for simply wasn't there. You don't suppose he's not in this universe anymore, do you, Hedwig? The owl ruffled her snowy white feathers in answer, almost as if she were saying, how should I know? Well, Familers can sense their masters. Can't they? Hedwig blinked, then clicked her beak. Of course they can. Don't be silly, Hedwig. She knew that Harry Potter's owl was the key, she could sense it. But there was a piece of this puzzle missing, one final thread that needed to be added to keep the tapestry from falling apart. She just didn't know what that thread was yet. But she was close. Every day she looked through the fabric, and every day she seemed closer and closer to one specific spot, a soft, warm presence that she couldn't quite reach. But if she reached that one specific presence, she just knew that she'd have that missing clue. So all the while she reached out and plucked through the strings of the universe with one single name echoing through time and space. Harry Potter. Darn. Harry's exclamation made Sirius look up from where he was watching the holo, surprised. His godson rarely ever cursed, and if he did it was usually only in the most extreme circumstances. But now, he saw Harry stumble through the door, with Ben standing behind him, and both had equally wide, goofy grins on their faces. He realized his godson had tripped while entering, but that still didn't explain the cursing. "Hey, Sirius," Harry said, and when he stopped he nearly fell over again. Ben broke into snickers and had to brace himself against the wall. "Fancy meeting you here, huh?" Sirius blinked. Then a familiar smell caught his attention. He stood, astonished. "Merlin, Harry, are you drunk?" "No." Ben said. Harry was busy steadying himself but his easy smile spoke otherwise. "Well, maybe pleasantly soused. But it's not bad or, wait, maybe we did have. How many drinks did we have?" "Lost count at 6, Harry replied. "Dear Merlin," Sirius muttered. "And what were you two doing out getting drunk?" "Celebrating," came the reply. Harry swayed again and this time Sirius caught his arm. "I can fly, Sirius. Janus showed me how." "Good to know," Sirius muttered. He felt at a loss. He wasn't sure what to do with two teenagers who were clearly more than pleasantly soused. "Ben." Mara's shocked voice caught his attention and he turned to find the redhead standing in the hallway. Her eyes wide with surprise although they quickly narrowed with anger. Ben cowered behind the door. Unfortunately his balance was off and he tripped and fell with a heavy thud onto the floor. "Ow!" Harry burst out laughing. "Oh, for force's sake!" Mara exclaimed, and with a glare she stalked over to her giggling son, who looked up at her with a widening grin. "I think the room's spinning, Mom," he said through a slur. "My fault, Ben Skywalker," Mara growled, and she looked more than angry. "Now, force help you tomorrow morning. I am going to kick your butt from here to Tatooine and back. Don't come complaining to me about the hangover you're going to have." She bent and slung Ben's limp arm over her shoulders and heaved him to his feet. She looked over at Sirius and motioned for him to follow. "Bring him along, too." She practically dragged Ben down the hall to his room, with Sirius following after keeping a firm hand on Harry's arm, who was still laughing to himself. Mara dumped her son on his bed and took his boots off and slung his jacket over a chair. Sirius summoned a bucket and handed it to her, and she placed it beside the bed. "We'll talk in the morning," she warned Ben. But he had already started to drift off, the alcohol he'd consumed finally catching up to him. She then took charge of Harry, while Sirius watched. Mara wrinkled her nose at the heavy smell on his clothes. "What did you two drink?" She muttered to herself, and did the same thing to Harry that she'd done to Ben. "You know you look a lot like my mum," Harry suddenly asked, and Sirius froze from where he stood. Mara's hand stopped just as they were removing his jacket, but to the man's amazement she showed nothing in her face or actions, only allowed Harry to ramble. "She had red hair and green eyes too, but her hair was darker. I know how she died, too. I remember it." Now Mara did stop, and even turned half away from him. Sirius could see the horror on her face as she stiffened. He could understand. Because he was just as horrified. "That's impossible, Hup," he whispered hoarsely, feeling his stomach clench. "You couldn't know, you were only one. I could when the Dementors showed up." Omic twisted painfully. Gently he ran his fingers through Harry's bangs, awkwardly, but the action was genuine. "Just sleep, pup. We'll talk in the morning." When he and Mara finally left, he could see the redhead was still shocked. "I didn't know," she whispered, very white in the face. Remembering his mother, but then she merely shook her head as if speaking aloud was just too difficult. And Sirius remembered that Mara was a mother herself. And that put a whole different twist to that. "You know that you won't find any pity from me," Jaina stated. She stood dressed in her flight suit, hanging onto the ladder that led up to the X-Wing's cockpit, looking down at Harry and Ben. There was just the hint of a smirk on her face that said that she found their situation amusing. "If you were dumb enough to drink yourself silly the other day, then it's your problem." "I'll never get drunk again," Harry muttered, and Ben nodded passionately. It had been 2 days since the night the two of them had stumbled home soused. And they still could swear that their heads hurt from the resulting hangover. They had received no sympathy from either Luke or Mara, or Sirius, and Ben had been banned from going anywhere but the temple for a week. Harry had been promised a punishment as well, but it was up to Sirius and so far he hadn't said anything about it. "Are you going to get up here or not, rookie?" Jaina asked impatiently. "You're all ready to go, you got your flight permit and everything." "Yeah, I'm coming." Ben grinned, his blue eyes bright with excitement. "You'll never want to leave the ship again. Just so you know," he warned him. "The sky's the limit." "I'll keep that in mind," Harry said, then climbed up the ladder and swung into the cockpit. Jaina checked his crash ebbing and instruments just as a precaution, then handed him his helmet. "Just remember that you can't just sit and gawk," she said. "Me and Ben and the others will be listening in, so if you need anything we'll answer." And then she was gone. Harry felt his hands trembling with excitement as he closed the cockpit and started the X-wing up. The instruments were fairly simple to understand, and he had grasped the basic flying quickly. And even Jaina had said that he was ready to actually take to space. So here he was, sitting in the cockpit of a ship, ready to fly in space. It felt almost unreal. He left the bay and shot out into the atmosphere of Coruscant, and he couldn't help but breath sharply, feeling the way it felt. "Everything all right?" His comm crackled with static, but he could clearly hear Jaina through it. "Perfectly fine," he answered, and hurried his speed, shooting away from the planet below. He pushed the X-wing faster, his sense of excitement pounding through him as he left his trepidation far behind. Desperate to get past the large cruiser beside him, he instinctively knew that the sight beyond would be beyond indescribable. The cruiser was finally beside him, he was racing beyond it. Standing in the comm room, hundreds of miles below, the Skywalkers, Jaina, and Sirius smiled at each other at the sound of his laughter. "I think we have to thank you, Jaina," Sirius said happily. A wide grin of his own on his face. This was just what he needed. Nothing a good fly won't cure. "I thought so," Jaina said with satisfaction, a small smile on her face. I could tell that he was a flyer when he heard about the X-wings. His eyes lit up. "He flies at home." "Yeah," Sirius nodded, "but he's never been to space. I'm never coming back down." They heard Harry shout over the comm. There was something strange Luke was feeling in the Force. It had been first just a small tingling in the back of his mind that had started a few days before. But now the tingling had grown to a ripple that reached through the Force, and although he tried to reach it he couldn't. It confused him. What was it that he was sensing? A Force user somewhere, or was it the Force itself, trying to tell him something? "Who are you?" he called out, and he received no answer, but it seemed to him like the presence sharpened, as if whatever it was had finally sensed him. He continued to reach out, and thought that the stranger was doing the same. And abruptly he slipped through the threads, and suddenly he was flooded with a calm, silvery presence, of peace and hope. He caught the glimpse of long blonde hair and bright gray eyes, and suddenly he could hear a girl's high voice echoing in his very soul through the Force. Harry Potter, and Luke broke the connection between them so quickly he nearly stumbled. His astonishment so strong he was speechless. Then he stood and sprinted from the room, calling out even before he even reached his outer office. "Harry." Finally she had reached him. The man really did have a beautiful presence, whoever he was. It was too bad she had not gotten his name before he disappeared again. Luna hummed to herself and turned to Hedwig, pleased. "I've found the key, Hedwig." There wasn't anything too bad about losing contact with the man, she knew. Now that they had actually reached each other, the door was fully open and they could easily find each other again. And she knew he would be back. He had, after all, responded to her calls for Harry Potter, which meant that the stranger must know him. Yes, he'd be back, and finally she would be able to decide exactly what she should do. It was only a matter of time, after all, because Harry Potter was alive. So, here's a long overdue update for you all who are still waiting. Thank you for being patient with me. What happened then? Ben asked when he had caught his breath. The wizard only grinned. And finally James says, "I love you." And she goes up and kisses him. And the rest, as they say, is history. Sirius sat back with a sigh of satisfaction, still chuckling to himself. Harry sat up from his spot on the floor, having finally calmed down enough to speak. "That's awesome," he finally said with a wide grin. He had been practically rolling on the floor as Sirius told the Skywalkers how James Potter had finally gotten Lily Evans to go out with him. "Did Dad ever try to coo? Mum something with you guys around again?" Sirius abruptly quieted. "No, he didn't," he exclaimed finally. "That newt, he didn't even fulfill his end of the dare because she didn't eat it." His Indie G-Nation caused the two boys to dissolve into helpless laughter again. From her place on the couch, Mara nodded in appreciation. "Sneaky," she remarked. "I like it, only because you'd like to get out of cooking dinner." Luke replied with a grin. "I don't see you cooking." "I never learned to cook," Sirius said broodingly, obviously still caught up on the trick his best mate had pulled. "You've never learned to cook?" Ben gaped open-mouthed at him, unable to believe what he'd just heard. Sirius just shook his head. "You know, I always wondered why you never helped Mrs. Weasley in the kitchen, Sirius," Harry observed with a rather sly smirk. "Besides the fact that by that point she was ready to stab me with her own butcher's knife." Sirius replied good-naturedly, "Yeah, I was banned from cooking. I'm not any good at it." "Then don't try it here," Ben advised him. "One bad cook in the family is enough." "Watch it, kiddo," Mara told him warningly. "I'm your mother as well as a Jedi Master. And I will not hesitate to lay you out on the floor." Harry laughed at Ben's expression. "Better luck next time, mate. Don't insult the one who makes your meals." Ben looked at him indignantly. "Well, why you don't try to make dinner?" he demanded. He expected Harry to blanch and back off, stuttering out reasons why he couldn't. He was therefore surprised when instead the young wizard smiled. "I'll take that bet. This is the best thing I've ever tasted," Mara exclaimed. Sure enough, Harry had cooked dinner, asking permission to use the kitchen before starting. The Skywalkers had been curious about what he was doing but were content to let him work, but Sirius was blatantly inquisitive and followed his godson around the kitchen. In the space of a couple of Hourglass dish, a casserole of noodles and meat and cheese, with a red sauce poured throughout something Harry called lasagna. There would be leftovers tonight. "I wasn't sure how it would turn out," Harry admitted. "We make this with different ingredients in my world. After all," he shrugged. "I'm glad it turned out all right." "It was excellent, Harry," Luke assured him. His smile was wistful. "It was something my aunt would have made." Harry smiled at the compliment the very highest. He recognized and stood to take the dirty dishes to the sink. "Where did you learn to cook, pup?" Sirius asked curiously. His godson shrugged again. "The Dursleys," he replied. When Sirius' expression darkened, he hastily explained, "They didn't start making me cook until I was 9, and it wasn't even all the time, anyway." "Yeah, well," Sirius grumbled. "The more I hear about the Dursleys, the more I want to give them a good scare." "The Dursleys?" Mara asked curiously, catching the abrupt shift of emotion in the conversation. "My aunt and uncle," Harry replied tiredly. "When Mum and Dad died I was given to them, but they don't particularly care for anything magic, including you." At Harry's reluctant nod, Mara made a low noise of disgust. "People like that, how long are you stuck with them?" "Until I turned 17. Luckily for me, when I turned 11 I was able to go to Hogwarts and I only have to put up with them on the summer holidays." "It's bad enough you have to go back at all," Sirius said. "But when we were at Grimmauld Place and you had the whole summer, why didn't you help Molly cook the meals?" "You only helped to set out silverware and bring out drinks." Harry grinned. "I loved Mrs. Weasley's cooking too much. You should give us some recipes of your favorite meals, Harry," Luke suggested. Why you can still enjoy them, albeit a little differently." Sirius said Harry's turning 16 soon, Luke explained to Mara when they were preparing for bed that night. "I was thinking we could help him celebrate it here." Mara smiled. "Remember how it felt to be 16, Skywalker?" Impatient," came his wry reply. She snorted. "I would be, too, stuck on a backwater planet with nothing to do." She saw his answering grin. He never disputed her veiled insults to his home planet, which only showed just how much he had hated it there. He had left Tatooine's deserts with Ben Kenobi all those years ago and had never gone back. "And what were you like at 16, Jade?" He did not reply to that, but she nonetheless sensed the pang he felt for her, knowing all too well that at the age of 16 she was in the midst of her training as the Emperor's hand. She reached across the bed and squeezed his hand, showing him a soft smile. Helping Harry celebrate his birthday would be wonderful, Skywalker. That night Luke woke with the sense that something was off. Not particularly bad, but simply out of order. Mara shifted restlessly in her sleep beside him but did not wake. Slipping out from under the sheets, Luke slowly walked out of the room and down the hallway, knowing already where he was heading, the room that Ben and Harry shared. When finally reaching his destination, he saw T. He young wizard was twisted in his covers, shifting restlessly, whether from nightmares or something else Luke didn't know, but he suspected it was from the latter. He patted his way to the side of the bed and, reaching down, gently shook the young wizard awake. Harry jerked awake and woke immediately, gasping from the sudden release from whatever he had been caught in, and opened his mouth to speak when seeing Luke there. Luke put a finger to his lips and motioned for Harry to follow him out to the living room. "What happened, Harry?" he asked when they were seated. Harry was curled up on the other end of the couch trying to blink the sleep from his eyes. "Visions," he answered distractedly, and reached up to rub the skin over his lightning bolt scar. "They're nothing new, I've been having them for a while now, but this is the first time I've had them here." Visions. He had never heard of this before. About what? About Voldemort. Harry dropped his hands and looked up at Luke. His eyes were tired. "We have a connection," he explained, seeing Luke's confusion, and motioned vaguely at the scar. "Through this. They started after he got his body. I can see him sometimes. I am him." Luke felt a chill shudder down his spine. "And you've never found out what causes them?" "It's just our connection. Have you ever tried to learn how to stop them?" He felt rather than saw Harry flush with shame. "I was told how to block him out," he answered quietly, "and I was given instruction, but I really didn't try. And anyway, I never really got the hang of it." Luke decided not to ask him what he meant by that. It really didn't matter. "Is there anything we can do? I can take you to Sigil and have her see." Harry shook his head. "No, but if it pains you." "It does," Harry said simply. That was a change. Luke had begun to notice Harry spoke of things a lot more matter-of-factly, foregoing self-pity. "But it doesn't change the fact that the connection is still there." Luke sighed, but decided to let it go. He was not going to win this battle, not right now, anyway. "Just let me know if it gets worse, all right? Don't suffer with this alone. It won't help you at all." He knew from personal experience. It seemed Harry knew that as well. "You didn't tell anyone that Darth Vader was your father, did you?" he asked quietly. "Been reading up on the rebellion, have you?" Luke was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "What could I possibly say to them? To anyone? That I was the son of the darkest Sith Lord. The rebellion would never have trusted me again. Even Leia." But then he stopped himself abruptly. "Even Leia what?" Harry had caught his slip. "Used you as a scapegoat," Harry replied with a mirthless grin. Then the grin widened with real humor. "At last Voldemort can't tell me he's my real father." Despite himself, Luke had to chuckle. But then Harry sobered, thoughtful. "Luke, yes, when I was reading about the dark side, I just had to wonder what causes the Sith to even stay in the dark. Why would anyone want to go there at all?" "Good question," Luke thought, and sat very still for a long moment. He was suddenly thrust back in time several decades, when He Emperor Palpatine had been reborn and Luke himself had dabbled in the dark side. It was a time that still remained his greatest shame. "Because it's more beautiful than the light," he answered without thinking. And realized only too late just what he had uttered. Harry frowned, thrown by the deeply earnest answer, and he didn't understand it either, because no matter how many times he had found himself in Voldemort's path, he had still never been truly touched or tempted by the darkness. Luke knew that, and prayed that the young wizard would be able to keep that innocence. He stood. "I think it's time we went back to bed," he said quietly. "Tomorrow morning, I want you to meet me at the temple 8 sharp." It was time, he thought, that Harry's training was tested. But as he crawled back into his bed and under the covers, he felt disgusted with himself, because he knew that no matter how truthfully he had spoken to Harry to get him to bed, it still stood that Luke had not wanted to explain his answer to the young wizard. It was a coward's way out, but one he had still chosen nonetheless. And Harry, who laid awake much longer than Luke ultimately did, could only wonder what he had meant. Once again, he was in the training circle at the Jedi Temple. Once again there was another test of endurance and durability that awaited the 15-year-old wizard. Sweat dripped down the back of his neck and stained the faded gray of his shirt despite the coolness of the room, but he ignored its clammy feel and focused instead on making this last jump over the obstacle sweeping down to knock his legs out from under him. At times, Harry wished for the Room of Requirement, with its ability to create any of the Wisher's needs. Seeing as it was to face off against this world's weapons like the Jedi lightsabers and the like. He missed normal wands and spells. He missed regular dueling in the meetings with Dumbledore's army. He missed Hogwarts as a whole. He missed his friends most of all. Growing up on Privet Drive with loveless guardians, Harry had never missed his childhood home, perhaps didn't even grasp what it meant to miss it. It still stood, however, that at the moment Harry Potter was feeling very homesick. Sirius understood, and that helped a little, and it was good to realize that he wasn't the only one missing friends, but sometimes he felt he would give up his mag. I see just to be able to see Ron and Hermione and the Weasleys, to see his friends Neville and Luna and the other Gryffindors in his year again. He missed Mrs. Weasley's home cooking, no matter how well the Skywalkers made their meals. He missed walking Hogwarts halls. Heck, he would even like to see Professor Snape of all people, just to get back in touch with what was familiar. As it was, however, he could not go back to his world until they found a way through the dimensions, so Harry had to find ways to distract himself. Distracting himself, he discovered, roughly meant practicing and training. Normally he trained with members of the Order. Ben was always willing to spar with him, but at times he wanted to simply be by himself and practice against the obstacles and droids that the Jedi used in their own training. Like he was doing now. He felt oddly jumpy and unsettled today, no doubt from his talk with Luke and his meeting with the Jedi Council the day before. They had tested him again, watched and discussed his fighting and defense, and finally decided that they needed more time to decide if he was ready or not. He froze where he stood, looking at it in slight surprise, then his gaze traveled down to his wand in bemusement. Whoops, he muttered. Darn it, he hadn't really meant to destroy it. I do believe you mean. Criff, came a familiar voice by the door, and he turned to find Jaina watching him with a slight smirk. A Solo smirk. He had come to call it. Jaina and her brother Jason and their father Han Solo all shared it. She pushed off of the wall and walked towards him. He shrugged and turned back to the smoking heap of droid. It's fixable, he answered, and before she could ask pointed at it. Attack form instigated, its voice said. Heck. Harry rolled his eyes. Attack command. Stand down. Standing down. The droid walked away to where its waiting fellows stood for the next practice, and Harry turned back to Jaina, who was looking after it in open astonishment. She turned to him with questioning eyes. How did you repair it? Mending charm. Used properly it can mend any inanimate object to its original state, Harry explained without thinking. The N realized how much he'd sounded like Hermione. Can you heal people with it? Jaina asked curiously. Right now Jaina was looking at him shrewdly, mulling over a question in her head. She had heard M practicing and had slipped into the room without him noticing, and so had seen his last few minutes of the fight. She had to admit that he was much improved than before. He no longer looked like the half-starved, blood-drenched kid they'd picked up off Coruscant streets. Eating regularly and training nearly every day for the past few months had allowed him to fill out more and gain muscle, and she'd noticed he'd grown a few inches. Still lean and still young, but less so now. Observing him, she caught glimpses of what would become his fighting style: graceful, open, and daring. Almost a trick, she realized. If he could learn a bit more and refine those movements, he could lull others into thinking he wasn't all that dangerous in a fight. He had the power and the reflexes to take care of himself. Hard to believe that he was still only 15. Where did you learn all of those spells? All right, she admitted she was interested in learning more about what he termed magic, and about where he would learn it. A slight grin twitched at the edge of his lips. Hogwarts, he answered quietly, School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. I got my acceptance letter back when I was 11. You've been learning for that long? Jaina asked, surprised. Yeah, I still have 2 more years to go, though we go there until our 7th year. She thought back to the Jedi Praxium on Yavin IV, her home for several years as she and Jason started their training as Jedi Knights. She wondered if this, Hogwarts, was anything like the Praxium. And spells for defense are what you're taught. He looked at her for a moment, then nodded again. One of our classes is defense against the dark arts, although we are taught some more spells that could be considered of a darker nature, I guess. Moody taught us about the unforgivable curses last year, anyway. Sound nasty, Jaina commented. He nodded. Yeah, using any of them as a straight-way ticket to the wizard prison, Azkaban. He didn't say anything else about them, though. So Jaina didn't press, but she could guess at least one of the curses, nature, and that was frankly all she needed to know. Taught. He looked at her again in open surprise, clearly thrown by her suggestion. And she rolled her eyes. Come on, you've been training for a long time now, but I don't think you've really gone all out with any of us yet. I want to know what you've been taught. He hesitated, unsure, and then his eyes cleared with determination and he grinned at her challenge. All right. Pulling out a long vibroblade out of her belt, she shed her robes and turned back to him with another smirk. Okay. I am giving you permission to use any spell you want as long as it isn't dark. I won't use my lightsaber, because I want you to go all out. Hit me physically if you want to. I just want to see you at your best. No hesitation, right? He asked with another grin. I'm a fence. She readied herself, waited until he seemed prepared. You ready? At his affirmative nod, she allowed her challenging smile to grow. Good. For a single moment, they stood where they were, waiting in slight crouches, waiting for Jaina's first move, which came when she made a slight motion with her fingers. A slight but audible ting from somewhere beside them was startling, and he almost looked away from her, and in that instant she pounced. Springing forward, she brought her makeshift weapon up to strike. Depulso. Incarcerus. Ropes sprang out of nowhere and flew at her, and she realized that they intended to tie themselves around her. She was merely feet from him and reacted instinctively. She used the force to shove them away back at him, thinking he was too close to be able to run. Evanesco. He was faster, and as the conjured ropes flung themselves back at their caster, they disappeared again as if they had never been, but by that time Jaina was already on top of him and he had no time to cast another spell. As she brought the vibroblade down to bear on him, he reached out a clenched hand and knocked her wrist away, and her weapon missed him by mere centimeters. At the same time he collapsed onto his back and brought his legs up. Oomph! His feet connected with her midsection and swung her over his head, a move she recognized as one Kip had taught him. Quick as a cat, she brought herself to a stop with the force before she could hit the floor and sprang lithely to her feet again. She saw him use his rolling weight to flip over onto his knees and then to his own feet, and for a moment they merely looked at each other, assessing and making adjustments to how they would fight. As he turned, causing a long tear in his shirt, and she saw it had drawn blood. He hissed in a breath at the pain it caused, but adrenaline was already pushing it away and he was able to keep moving. She didn't allow the knowledge that she had hurt him slow her down either. She had drawn blood before. She made to lunge at him, feinting with the vibroblade at his side. Quick as lightning he swung his wand up at her face and shouted. Lumos. Bright light struck her in the unable to see. She could tell that Harry was moving and relied on the force to see him. He was raising his wand. The spell he shot at her was familiar now. Incarcerus. She was prepared for the spell now, however, and using the force twined the ropes together as they flew through the air. She gripped one end with her outstretched hand and used them to pull them towards him, pulled taut before going slack again. His eyes widened, thrown off balance, and she used that moment of surprise to knock his wand out of his hand. It clattered to the floor on the other side of the room. He froze, drawing a sharp breath through his nose at its tingling blade, and for a moment silence reigned in the room with only their breathing to break it. Knowing Jaina had won, he nodded slowly. Yeah. He sagged a little when she took the vibroblade away from his throat and went to retrieve his wand. She grinned to herself and turned to put the vibroblade away and therefore missed his move. Petrificus totalis. To her astonishment, Jaina felt her arms snap to her sides and her legs froze together. And she fell heavily onto the floor, looking up at the ceiling. Harry came into her view with a surprisingly playful smile as he crouched beside her. Why don't we call it a draw? Well, Hot as he saw Jaina look up at him with surprised and indignant eyes, at least he didn't feel homesick anymore. Uncle Luke, I'm telling you he's ready. Luke studied Jaina carefully, wondering where this sudden change of heart had come from. Just the other day you told me you didn't believe he was. She shrugged uncomfortably. I hadn't fought against him then, she admitted a little sheepishly. At Luke's raised eyebrows, she hastened to explain. It was nothing. Really, I wanted to see him fight using all of his ability to see just how much he knew, and he agreed. Who won? It was a draw, she replied. But he did show that he's fast and creative in his fighting. I was afraid that he would only use his magic, but all the physical training we've been giving him has paid off. He almost dumped me flat on my back. Good. Luke was silent for a long moment, considering, then met her gaze. You believe he is ready for a field mission? She thought about it, then nodded slowly. Yes, if he has some experienced knights watching his back, anyway. She thought for a second. Then, tricky. He seemed to have fun. Well, he was bound to with something. No teenager can be that serious all the time. You sure about that? I'm certain I have absolutely no idea who you're talking about, Jedi Solo. Of course you don't, Master Skywalker. You must be getting forgetful in your advancing age. I may be advancing in age, but I can still hear you just fine. The Outer Rim, Skywalker. Really? Him? Because he's proven that he can handle himself well. Luke stopped what he was doing and looked up at her. Besides, this assignment isn't anything at all, merely something that I wanted checked out. I'll be sending Jason along with him, so he'll be okay. Mara still looked unconvinced, but she decided to drop the matter for the moment. Instead, she joined him at the countertop and helped him mix up the batter. Never a very good cook, Mara did not partake in the actual mixing the dinner but helped read out the directions and ingredients, grabbing utensils and mixing spoons as directed. It was a well-known fact in the Skywalker household that it was Luke who worked the kitchen. How can you actually like cooking, Skywalker? Mara demanded in the silence, the usual question asked when she helped him. She looked almost disgusted as she looked at the bowls and such scattered messily across the countertop. Because I'd rather not suffer from food poisoning, he answered with a grin, and she couldn't help but laugh. Those who claimed that Luke Skywalker did not have a sense of humor simply didn't know him. He sobered though, because I find it nice that I can cook a meal for my family. She couldn't not accept that answer, and so she did not comment further. Instead, she grabbed the bag of flour and turned to put it away. And somehow, it managed to slip through her fingers, her grip not entirely sure on the top. She cursed and lunged forward to catch it. Too late. The room seemed to fairly explode in a cloud of fine white powder, thick enough that for a moment neither of the Skywalkers could clearly see each other. When finally the air cleared a little, Luke found Mara standing shell-shocked beside the dropped bag of spilled flour. Everything on her was white, her hair, her clothes, her skin, all covered except for her eyes. For a moment they could only stand and look at each other. Then he snorted, a wide smile spreading across his face, knowing he surely didn't look any better than she did. Then he laughed at the sheer absurdity of what had happened. And unable to do anything else, she laughed too. By the Force, why does it always happen to me? She complained when she calmed a little. Luke held back another round of laughter at his wife's expense. Because you're easy prey in the kitchen, he suggested innocently. She glared half-heartedly at him. I'm getting in the Sanesteem, she sighed in resignation. Well, at least now we'll know you'll look good going white-haired. Luke called gamely after her, and her response was colorful. He laughed to himself for another moment as he looked at the kitchen, then back to the preparations for dinner. He shrugged and continued on the food. The birthday party and its guests was small, but that was how they all preferred it. Luke, Mara, and Ben as the hosts, as it was held in their apartment. Then there was Han and Leia Solo, accompanied by Jason and Jaina. 2 droids came with them. One was humanoid, covered in shining golden plating with round glowing eyes. Its companion was a cylindrical droid, rolling along on 3 feet, for balance, with a domed head that swiveled to and fro. Harry watched them in open fascination. Ben's chuckling beside him made him look over. What? The D head shook his head to show he was not making fun. That's 3PO and R2, 2 of Dad's longest companions. They've been with our family for years. At that moment the golden droid 3PO came up and bowed quickly. Its actions were jerky and excitable, as if it was never able to sit still. "Oh, it is wonderful to see you again, Master Ben," it said, and its rather sophisticated voice startled Harry. He had had several encounters with droids here on Coruscant, but this one seemed more human than any of the others did. 3PO's companion beeped a rather impatient-sounding reply, to which the golden droid straightened. "You don't have to remind me that it has only been 2 months since we have seen Master Ben, you rusted scrap heap." It sniffed. Ben chuckled again. "It's good to see you too, 3PO," he said fondly. "I'd like you to meet my new friend, Harry Potter." 3PO stepped back and turned to look at the young wizard. "Oh my, where are my manners?" it exclaimed to itself, completely ignoring a complete breach of etiquette. "I am sorry, Master Harry. I am C-3PO, Human-Cyborg Relations, and this is my counterpart, R2-D2. The short droid tweetled a long reply, dome swiveling to look at Harry. Its tone, somehow, sounded approving. R2 would like to say, "Hello," 3PO translated, "and that Master Luke was right to take you in." Then the golden paused and swung to its companion. "Master Luke? What has Master Luke got to do with this?" Ben shook his head with a grin and grabbed Harry's elbow to drag him away from the talking droids. "If you don't leave now, you won't. 3PO'll keep talking until he's forced to shut up." They ended up beside Han and Leia as they conversed with the Skywalkers near the kitchen. Their tone, however, was not entirely happy. "What Corellia is doing," Mara was remarking quietly where she leaned against the wall. "Their planetary government is unhappy with what the Galactic Alliance is doing," Leia replied unhappily. And sent a warning glance at her husband as he opened his mouth to Sphy Alliance is weak and corrupt, and that they want no part in its activities. "So they want to cut ties with the rest of the Alliance?" Luke asked in surprise. "Who's instigating that?" Leia shook her head. "We don't know. Whoever it is, they're being quiet." "Harry," Mara suddenly said, forcing a quick smile, The tension between the 4 adults quickly evaporated. Leia's smile was warm and open as she shook his hand. "You still seem rather surprised about this party that Luke and Mara have thrown for you," she remarked wryly. "So, kid, how old are you?" Han asked with a smirk. 16. 16. I can remember when I was that young. First time I ever stole my first ship." "You stole a ship?" Harry repeated incredulously. Han's smirk widened. "Well, I brought it back, anyway, after I was done with it." The previous conversation that Harry and Ben had managed to overhear was temporarily forgotten. Sirius caught up to his godson and was smiling delightedly. "Hey, kiddo, we've got another surprise for you." "Another one?" Harry repeated, wondering what it could be now. Then Leia and Mara, having snuck into the kitchen, came out carrying a large cake, decorated with red and gold icing. Sirius' contribution and idea with, "Happy Birthday, Harry," written in beautifully written letters. He stared at it for a long moment, dumbstruck, then turned to Luke. "You made this, didn't you?" "What makes you think that?" The Jedi Master replied blithely, grinning. "Because you're the one who knows how to cook." The crowd around him laughed as Mara glared at him in mock anger, but she couldn't help but smile in the end. "Thank you." And there it was, the pure, undiluted joy that Mara had wondered what would feel like in the Force. After the cake, which was very quickly eaten completely, Harry received yet another surprise when Mara made him sit on the couch and handed him his gifts, one from the Skywalkers and another from the Solos. The gift from the Skywalkers turned out to be a dark fatigue suit like those the Jedi wore, with black boots made of soft leather. He turned to them in astonishment. "What's the special occasion?" "Well, you're going to have to wear something on your first mission," Luke answered cryptically. "The clothes you're wearing won't work with something like that. I'm ready for a mission." "Already?" Harry turned and shared a swift look with Sirius, who was suddenly sitting rather stiffly in his seat. "But have I trained long enough for that?" "Skywalker thinks you have," Mara assured him and left it at that, although she glanced at Jaina as she said it. Assurance that he could let this be his own personal pad to place whatever he wanted on it. "I want Ed to give you a bottle of Corellia's finest whiskey," Han said with a mischievous smirk, "but her worship said you were a bit too young to drink." "And she is quite right, Master Han," C-3PO said from where he stood in the back. "After all, Master Harry is not yet of age, and there is a 10-to-1 odd that. Never tell me the odds, Goldenrod, Han interrupted smoothly. We'll save it for later. Ben hid a grin behind his hand. And Harry snorted, remembering both of them drinking themselves into oblivion only a couple of weeks before. He rather doubted that anyone would bring that up in front of Han, though. It was a good birthday. This isn't a typical mission, Jason, Luke said quietly to his nephew. They stood out on the balcony of the Skywalkers' apartments, as the rest of the family cleaned up after the party. Jason could tell by his uncle's demeanor that he was utterly serious. There's something that has been concerning out in the Outer Rim. I need you to go and check things out. Let us know what's out there. You sense something coming, Uncle. Jason was no stranger to how powerful Luke Skywalker was in the Force. Time and time again he had proven why he was the head of the Order. And if Luke Skywalker was sensing something off, then it wasn't wise to brush it off. I've seen it, Luke replied hesitantly. He shook his head. Visions. Garbled and confusing, but they make enough sense for me to know that there's something dark, something threatening. Wouldn't this be a mission better suited for a master, Uncle Luke? Of all the things to say, the Jedi Knight had not expected that. Quote, what that means I don't know. All I know is that you have to be the one to go on this mission. You will leave in 2 days. Meet me at the temple and I will give you all of the information concerning this. Jason bowed. Yes, Master. He turned to go back inside, thinking himself dismissed, but Luke called him back. Jason, I am having Harry go with you. The Jedi Knight froze. Master. He couldn't help his open amazement, not sure if he had heard his uncle clearly. Are you sure that's wise? After all, if this turns out to be serious, who's to say he will be able to take care of himself? We have to trust him with this. Luke's voice was unrelenting, because as surely as I know that these visions concern you, they concern him too. Jason's joke in this chapter is my personal favorite. So where is it that we're going? Jason looked over from the console he was studying to where Harry sat in the co-pilot's chair. He grinned to himself, seeing how enthralled Ed the teenager seemed gazing out at the wide expanse of stars, knowing that Harry had fallen in love completely with outer space. Several people did, for Jason space had also fascinated him. A trait that seemed to be passed down through the Skywalker line. But he had found that following his capture from the Yuuzhan Vong and his instruction from the Foch Vergir, he had lost much of that previous interest. Light and the dark sides. His 5-year sojourn throughout the galaxy had taught him much, but he still wanted to discover more. We're going to the Outer Rim, he answered slowly. Just as a heads up. It's not as civilized as Coruscant, so don't be surprised when you see some things. Like what? Harry had turned away from the sight of the stars and was instead looking at him curiously. Jason snorted. Like slavery. For one, he said. Smuggling, gambling, covert operations, illegal spice mines. He could have gone on, he supposed, but he had always thought that the list was depressing. But Harry didn't seem as shocked as he could have been. Perhaps the kid really wasn't as innocent as Jason thought him to be. I guess not a whole lot changes between dimensions, then, the teenager replied quietly. A sad smile was shared between them, realizing how true the statement was. It's a place called Adumar, Jason explained out of nowhere, carefully ignoring the way Harry turned to look at him with surprise. He kept his eyes on the console. A quiet planet, inconspicuous. But there's something going on there, from what I've been told. Something that could threaten the Alliance. And we're supposed to do what? Exactly. Harry shook his head in confusion. Not start something. No, we're supposed to scope it out. See what they're up to. It's going to be a stealth mission. So it's important that we're not seen. It was not a question. Jason nodded. Exactly. And we could maybe start a war if we're caught. Jason froze for a moment, then straightened and looked at the teenager. His expression was guarded, almost wary. How much of my parents' conversation with Uncle Luke and Aunt Mara did you overhear? He asked carefully. Harry shrugged. Enough to let me know that it's important. That anything could probably spark a war between Corellia and the Alliance. For a long moment the Jedi Knight sat in silence. Then he nodded slowly. Yes, the tensions been building between them for a while now. Harry grinned again. You know, I think that maybe Corellia isn't totally wrong, he remarked quietly. Jason's gaze sharpened. What do you mean? Again the teenager shrugged. I'm just saying that in a government there's always room for improvement. Maybe all they need is some compromise between them. I don't get why Corellia couldn't rule themselves, anyway. But why does the Alliance have to be the one individual planet systems be in charge of themselves with help and mutual aid between them and the Alliance? Normally, Jason Solo perhaps would have become a little defensive, argumentative, even in matters such as this, but now, he couldn't help but laugh. Harry frowned. What is it? Jason allowed himself to laugh a few more seconds, feeling his heart throb painfully. It's nothing. It's just you remind me of my younger brother Anakin. The door to the room was locked and he had already told everyone to leave him by himself for a couple of hours. Finally, Luke could leave himself to meditate fully. He sat cross-legged in the middle of the small, comfortable study, immersing himself in the Force, searching again for the mysterious presence he had sensed before. When Harry had been told about one of his friends seeking for him through use of the Force, he had responded with humored disbelief. You're kidding me, right? Luke shook his head, completely serious. No, I'm not. The young wizard stared at him in open astonishment and confusion before shaking his head vehemently. But we don't have the Force in my world. Harry, there are many different types of energies in the universe, some completely undiscovered to us. Who's to say that one or the other doesn't exist in a lesser extent in our respective worlds? Harry blinked, taken aback by the possibilities Luke's response had opened up. Hermione would have a field day with that one, he muttered to himself, then seemed to resign himself to hearing what Luke would say. All right, say that someone in my world has the ability to touch the Force. Who was it? Could you tell? A girl. Your age, maybe younger. Blonde. Harry blinked again. With gray eyes. Luke nodded. A soft, high voice. Harry's mouth dropped open. Luna, he breathed, and then the corner of his mouth twitched into a grin. Of course. Why wouldn't it be Luna? She's been searching for you, calling your name. Does she even know what she's using to search? Luke shrugged. I don't know. Probably not, as you say that your world has no knowledge about the Force. She's more than likely running on pure instinct. He smiled with wonderment. She would have to be quite powerful to be able to use it like she has. And that was what Luke was currently counting on. He could recon eyes a fellow Force user when he sensed one, and this girl Luna was most definitely someone who could. It was surprisingly easy to find her again. A doorway, perhaps, opened between worlds as a pathway. So it was no chore to search for each other again. The girl recognized him immediately. You know Harry Potter. Her voice was soothing, presence a silver sea of calm. His reply was simple. I do. Delight, as innocent as a child's. A smile, perhaps. Tell him we're looking for the bridge. Then he will be able to come home. Then she was gone as quickly as she had met him. Luke allowed her presence to slip away and prepared to end his meditation, and then curiosity got the better of him. He wondered if perhaps through this newfound pathway he would be able to sense Harry's world, and reached out, searching. He sensed fear, anxiety, love, hate, happiness, a whole myriad of emotions born of a world. It was faint to be sure, but he smiled to know that he could sense it anyway. A whole world, undiscovered and mysterious, a world without conscious use of the Force. Ben told me about him, Harry confessed softly. Anakin. He said that he died in a previous war. Jason nodded gruffly. Over a decade later, and it was still perhaps the most painful memory he possessed, seeing his kid brother fighting the Yuuzhan Vong warriors bearing down on him, bloodied and battered, bleeding internally and dying. Glowing with golden energy as he fought his last stand. A 16-year-old boy, defeat simply doing his duty as a Jedi Knight. Of course, the Order had lost a lot of Jedi to the Vong. Simply because of centuries of mistaken hatred and revulsion. Harry was playing nervously with his datapad, swallowing hard. I saw someone die, he said quietly, almost to himself. Jason listened. A boy, 17, a few years older than I was. We were in a tournament, in the final task, and we had to navigate a maze and find the winner's cup. We reached it at the same time and I told him to take it with me. He laughed bitterly. I didn't know that the cup would take us to that graveyard. I didn't know that Voldemort was waiting there. But he was, and he said to defeat the spare. And when I looked, Cedric was dead on the ground. He breathed deeply and squeezed his eyes shut, calming himself. He looked over at Jason. It was my fault. I shouldn't have told him to take the cup. Silence. Then, Harry snorted. Too many, he responded dryly. But he did appear to be thinking about what Jason had just said. Vergier would have liked talking with Harry, he thought to himself. Heck. He would like to talk with Vergier again. But there was no way to, and she had taught him to let go of what you could not have. Hey, he said with a sudden smile, what goes ha ha ha, thump. Harry looked over at him like he was crazy. I don't know, he answered carefully. What? Jason nodded, still laughing himself. But clever, he answered, then managed to clamp down on his own humor and force it aside. For a long moment the two of them simply sat in silence, but whatever reservations that had existed between them was gone now. The ice had been breached, and despite age difference EY ultimately agreed a mutual friendship was begun. If Jason still entertained thoughts that Harry Potter reminded him of his younger brother Anakin, however, he kept them carefully to himself. As a Muggle-raised orphan living in a cupboard under some stairs for the first 11 years of his life, and living at Hogwarts nearly all the time for the past 5, Harry Potter had never had experience with factories. His uncle Vernon worked with a company that made drills, but Vernon himself had never worked on the actual building of them. Probably thought that physical labor was beneath him, the lard ass. Harry thought with a small grin, but very quickly smoothed his features into polite indifference so as to mirror Jason's. He wondered if this dirty, metallic smell ripe with dripping chemicals was anything like Muggle workshops. He had been unprepared for the smell that swept over them as they were led into the building, wrinkling his nose before making himself ignore it. He couldn't afford to be distracted in this. Jason walked a step ahead of him, dressed in customary Jedi robes, making no effort to disguise that he was the Jedi Knight who had almost single-handedly ended the Yuuzhan Vong War. Harry himself wore the inconspicuous fatigue outfit that Luke and Mara had given him. His wand was secured up his left sleeve in a holster so that he seemed as innocent and harmless as possible. He knew that if things went bad, that advantage was what they both counted on. It was doubtful that these people here on Adumar wouldn't be familiar with Jedi and their ways, but faced with a wizard and magic would be a totally different matter. Assembly lines. Harry had heard over the news at home how some people liked them and how others bitterly objected them, claiming they were dangerous and a job without pay. It seemed to him that these workers belonged to those of the latter type. Aliens and humans both stood nearly shoulder to shoulder beside each other, reaching for individual pieces and parts of different machinery. The Jedi replied with a minuscule shake of his head. No, whatever it was that they were supposed to be on the lookout for was not there. These people, he asked, looking at their guide. What are they building? Ships, came the nervous reply. The guide was eyeing Jason fearfully, as if afraid of being struck. Othar helpful supplies for our customers. Weird accent, but understandable. Jason's brow quirked, and Harry realized that the Jedi had probably sensed a lie, but the reaction was gone as soon as it had come, and Jason was back to looking just as indifferent. What customers do you do business with? The Jedi asked quietly. The Alliance, yes. The guide nodded. Yas, he answered swiftly. No one else. That seemed like a lie, even Harry could see that. But again Jason did not do anything more than look at their guide for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, he finally said. You can continue our tour. Everything looks to be in good order here. He turned to look at Harry. You can leave us to go back to the ship now, kid, he said. I'll be there shortly. Harry frowned and straightened, frowning, and opened his mouth to protest. Now, Jacobs, Jason ordered, stern. Harry slumped, accepting defeat. Yes sir, he muttered, and turned swiftly on his heel, heading back towards the doors. Kids these days, he heard Jason laugh to the guide. So stubborn. Quote, now for the fun part. The first time Harry had learned of the disillusionment charm had been the summer before his 5th year, and Mad-Eye Moody had placed it upon him while traveling to Grimmauld Place. During lessons with Sirius over the past few months, Harry had demanded his godfather teach it to him, wanting to learn as much as he could in the ways of spells and charms before helping the Jedi. Sirius had happily obliged, delighted to be teaching his godson magic one-on-one. Now it would come in handy. He tapped himself on the head with his wand with the whispered incantation and immediately felt the remembered cold similar to a raw egg sliding down his neck and all the way to his toes. Looking down at himself, he smiled to see that there was no sign of his own body at all. Pleased that the spell had worked, quickly he made his way through the corridors, slowly making his way farther and deeper into the factory, careful to avoid hitting anything and drawing attention from unwanted sources. His years of traveling discreetly beneath his invisibility cloak in Hogwarts had taught him to move quickly and silently enough, all the while looking for any signs of the covert making of weaponry that he and Jason had been sent to see about. For several minutes he merely made his way down the corridors, wondering what clues he could be looking for. They merely needed the proof that weapons were being assembled, even if it was only in pictures. Sirius would have come if the Jedi had allowed him, but Luke had strongly spoken against it for some reason. Harry wondered about that, supposing the Jedi Master knew something he didn't, but he still missed his godfather's presence. Oh well, there would be plenty of time to catch up after he and Jack made it back to Coruscant and to find out what Sirius was getting him for his birthday. His godfather had been unnaturally closed-mouthed about that, stating that his gift would be ready after he got back. Maybe it would be a way back home. Long shot, but certainly hopeful. He reached a back corridor splitting into two different ways as it went. After a moment Harry took the left, hoping he'd become too terribly lost on his way. Jason would meet him eventually, after he had shaken off the guide. Machinery whirred and clicked in the silence of the halls, and Harry tried to keep his footsteps quiet. He peered through a window that overlooked another assembly line, but the things they were working on seemed harmless. Unless, perhaps, there were weapons built into the machinery. He didn't have to wait long. Hearing footsteps echoing along the corridor, he looked to find Jason approaching, looking for all the world like he was meant to be there. He stopped by the window where Harry was at and looked through it himself. He had felt the boy's dilemma through the Force, the underlying impatience, and had come looking for him. They say impatience leads to the dark side, he muttered quietly. Yeah, and I'm Merlin's heir, came Harry's sarcastic retort. Jason shifted, lifting his chin a little. To the cameras hidden it would seem he was innocently looking down at the workers. What have you found? Nothing. Yet. There was a pause. Then. I was thinking, though, what if we've been looking right at the weapons all along? Jason nearly smiled at the idea but managed to school his expression. So what were you planning? Harry shouldn't have been surprised by the question, but he was. He had been expecting the Jedi to brush the idea off or tell him they couldn't do anything to prove it. But Jason was a solo. He reminded himself, if he was anything like his twin Jaina, then Jason would be no stranger to stepping a little out of line. Dung bombs, he said simply. Jason's brow quirked. Would we survive the smell? He asked jokingly. Or at least Harry hoped he said jokingly. Barely. Let's do it, then. Jason swept off to the door, making it open. I'll distract them. And just like that he was striding into the assembly room, smiling in greeting to all of the workers. Harry slipped in behind him just before the door slid shut again, making sure to keep a wide berth between him and the nearest worker. Jason was asking them different questions, wondering how long some of them had been working and what they were working on. Harry made his way to a far corner near a vacated table and crouched beneath it, placing his dung bombs near the far right leg. They weren't like the dung bombs he was familiar with at Hogwarts. These were near enough, though, created by a mix of waste and spells and charms so that they stank horribly when used. Sirius had been the mastermind behind them. As a marauder it seemed to come with the territory that he would know all the best prank spells and charms. And his apartments had stunk to high heaven as he figured out the perfect formula for these new and improved stinkers, as Sirius had called them. Quick as he could he moved away, nearly running to get as far away as possible, and just in time too, because it was then the table was blown in half and a horrendous stench began to spread throughout the room. Screams began to break out everywhere. The startled workers trying to leave or figure out what had happened while Jason tried to calm them down. Harry grinned. In true marauder fashion, Sirius had made sure his recipe of dung bombs created a memorable explosion. A table crashed over, spilling bits and pieces everywhere. Quick as a flash, Harry bent and picked up a small but complete piece of machinery, mock ing sure to stick it securely in a pocket before continuing towards the door. Jason was sending a calming sensation through the force, starting to influence the workers to settle down again. Everyone out, he called over the noise. Gesturing towards the door, the stench was becoming overpowering, even the Jedi's eyes were watering. Harry had never seen a room clear out so fast, and he had been in Snape's class for 5 years. Jason used the chaos of the hallway to address him again. What was that? He choked out, coughing. Dung bombs, Harry repeated unhelpfully, trying to hide his smile even though he knew Jason couldn't see him. Marauders Edition. Did you get what you wanted? Now Harry grinned. Yes. Good. Now, I'll go talk to someone here and explain what happened. You go on to the ship. Put your prize in a safe place. Yes, sir. No one was around the ship when Harry approached. No one living, at least. Hidden in the shadows, a small spider-like droid scuttled forward, following his heat signature. Even invisible, he wasn't completely hidden. Breathing a sigh of relief, he lifted the enchantment and started to bring the ramp down. Curiously, he began to draw the small object he'd picked up off the floor out of his pocket now. And suddenly his left calf exploded with pain. He could feel blood running down his leg as he hissed a curse and turned to find a strange metal creature angling to attack him. One of its feet had twisted into a knife-like edge, dripping red with blood. Petrificus totalis. Reacting without thought, he froze the little creature, dropping the device on the floor as he reached for his wand. To his relief, the spell worked on the spider. It froze with its leg reaching out to strike him again. Still, it seemed to vibrate, as I fopped. Curious, he stooped to look at it better. Jason would probably be able to find out more about it than he would. Carefully he touched it and placed it in a side pocket, then reached for the dropped device. Climbing up the ship's ramp, he didn't notice some of his blood had fallen on the floor. The device lay stripped and gutted along a long table in the ship, wires trailing and the metal casing in pieces. Silent, Harry looked down at it slumped where he sat. Bright green lights blinked and flashed deep within the mess of wires, even dissected a system within the device that acted independently, easily taken from this small casing to be placed in larger, much more dangerous objects. Weapons built for Corellia. Jason fumed, pacing back and forth in his agitation. They're planning to strike against the Alliance. Jason, Chief Omaz is right, there shouldn't be negotiations at all for these people. Jason, still too quiet. The Jedi paid no mind to Harry at all. Should be punished for what they're doing. Jason, now Harry shouted, impatient with the single-minded drive that had overcome the normally level-headed young man. This time, he was loud enough. Jason stopped mid-stride and looked at him with surprise. Finally, don't you think that this is a little too unlikely? Wordless answers were always interesting, and it was clear by Jason's gobsmacked expression that Harry's question had thrown him. What do you mean by that? He was channeling Hermione, Harry decided. Only that would explain why he was being so calm while Jason was so upset. Come on, he said a little impatiently, think about it. There's tension between one planet and the Alliance, and on our first look in Adumar we just so happened to stumble into the evidence that will make us believe it's Irrevoca. Bly Corellia that's ordering the weapons made. Silence. Jason blinked at the insight, and then the anger abruptly melted away and he was nodding slowly in agreement. So what do you suppose this is? Harry shrugged. Back in my world, when Voldemort was rising to power the first time, I was told he planted mistrust and fear everywhere. Made people doubt everyone else. That gave Voldemort the time. He needed to build up his forces and plan on striking all while the wizarding world tore itself apart from the inside. Jason's expression cleared with sudden understanding. So there's a game master, he murmured. And Corellia, the Alliance, were just the pawns. Jason sat down slowly, expression far away. It does, he agreed slowly. We'll have to make that point when we explain everything to the Council. His eyes were dark with old memories. The galaxy's been manipulated enough. We'll have to work to make sure this ends before it can really begin. I'm dedicating this to my sister. You know exactly who you are. And it was because of your endless nagging and inquiries about this story that has allowed me to keep going with it. I hope this makes a great and very, very late Christmas gift for you. The spider-like droid was looked over at the Jedi Temple, secreted away from Alliance guards in one of the lower levels so that the masters could study it in private. Jacen, headed to his quarters, turned and laid a friendly hand on Harry's shoulder. You did well, kid. Master Skywalker will be receiving a good report. When are we going to talk to them about Harry, ND Jacen had discussed the several possibilities of this potential Game Master, while en route to Coruscant after the latter had finished meditating away any last vestiges of anger from his mind. The last thing he needed, Jacen thought wryly, was to manipulate it by his own emotions. Vergier had frequently taught him that emotion could be used but wisely, never to be the ultimate leading factor. Emotion is useful, she'd said after a particularly harsh day in Vong-occupied Coruscant, until you're led directly into a trap with a cloth over your eyes. He wondered sometimes whether there was a balancing act between the light and the dark sides. It seemed that one felt too much and the other felt too little. While discussing possibilities, Harry had wondered if maybe no one would listen to them after all. Neither of us are masters, and I'm not even a Jedi, but Jacen had assured them that they would. They had decided to wait to tell anybody about their own ideas until hearing the Council's reactions to the weapons discovered. Before letting go of the boy, Jacen squeezed Harry's shoulder. Meet me by the temple doors around 7, all right. I want to show you something. Saba Sabaton approached them, her long tail swaying back and forth. This one greets you, she hissed. She is pleased you made it back safely. How did the hunting go? Satisfactory, Master Sabaton, Jacen answered, bowing slightly. I believe we found what we were looking for. He shared a quick glance with Harry. By your leave, Master. This one will you to the council, Saba hissed to Harry. When he hesitated she missed a low laugh. Do not worry, this one will not bite you. Harry walked a step behind her. He had grown several inches already in the time he had been here but she still towered over him. One glistening eye swiveled to look at him. This one senses you have a question for her. Harry swallowed. Why do you do that? Address yourself in the third person. Is it something common to your people? She nodded. It is native to this one's people. Her nest mates know no other. What species are you? I'm sorry, I ever asked you. How had he never managed not to? Saba had taught him, just as the others had, but he had never inquired about it nor had anyone told him. This own's people are called Barabels. They didn't sound familiar. Are there more of you here? At the temple, this own's son. Is there anyone else? She hesitated. For a moment he thought there was something pained to her eye before she pushed it away. Once, the Yuuzhan Vong hunters defeat this own's force mates. Again with the Yuuzhan Vong. From what he had gathered, the war between them and the Alliance had ended more than 15 years ago, but the invaders had left deep scars. Saba's story was one of many such things he had heard. I'm sorry. She looked at him again. This one thanks you. She gathers you have lost loved ones as well. My parents. They were defeated by Voldemort when I was 1. Saba hissed angrily. They were near the doors of the council rooms. This one thinks it would be good to hunt your Voldemort. He was pretty sure that if this creature showed up wherever Voldemort was, then the latter would run away screaming like a little girl. The mental image was amusing enough that he couldn't help but grin. Luckily Saba didn't notice. He didn't know if she would understand humor in Voldemort lifting up the hems of his robes and fleeing. This one will think about it, he said softly to her as he entered the room. She hissed a laugh. You are funny, Harry Potter, she said amusedly and left his side to take her seat with the rest of the masters. Everyone was there today, clearly discussing the implications of what Jacen and Harry had found. He was going to have to learn their poker faces, because none of them gave any hint of what they were thinking. Luke motioned him forward. Jacen told us you acted brilliantly, he began quietly. A wry smile twitched at his mouth at the use of the last word. And all things considered, we all agree. Thank you, Master. Our best technicians are going to find out about the droid's origins. Is there anything else about it or what happened that you want to add? The cut on his leg throbbed beneath his pants. Quickly he shook his head. No, Master Skywalker. Nothing. But he stopped himself then, wondering if he was out of place. Luke's brow rose. Yes. He hesitated, but his curiosity got the better of him. What will be done when the Alliance finds out about this? This could be a cause for war, couldn't it? A wave of uncomfortable shifting passed through the silent room. Several of the Jedi were looking down at their feet or out the windows, Harry NOF foreboding. Luke, however, answered as calmly as he ever did. Not even Leia, or Han. For a moment Harry wondered whether Luke's sister and brother-in-law would count this secret as a betrayal. But very quickly decided that it didn't. You're worrying about. And you want my word that I'll keep silent about it as well. Oh, very smart, Jaina smirked, but it was without malice. Luke fought another grin. Yes, it seemed funny that they would bother asking him at all. After all, Harry held no loyalty to the Galactic Alliance. He assured them that he would keep the findings to himself and went on his way. Idly he wondered how Luke would feel when he found out that he and Jacen were keeping their own counsel. Sirius was in dog form resting on the Skywalker's couch when Harry let himself in. More comfortable that way, Sirius had explained. One evening when Harry asked him why he slept in dog form. The younger wizard had only given him a funny look and moved on to other things, but it amused him when Sirius went around as Snuffles. Mara hated it. It drove her around the bend when she found shaggy black dog hair everywhere, and like his typical self, Harry's godfather went around as a dog even more just to hear her rant. Thanks for the dung bombs, Sirius, he smirked, petting the dog on the head as he passed. Snuffles yipped excitedly and suddenly Sirius was sitting there with a wide smile. How did they do? Brilliantly. What did you use for the stench? Sirius shrugged. A mix of things. Stuff on the street. Something called Bantapoo. I think I used someone's sock. He trailed off. I dunno, it was just really smelly. Harry sat beside him. It was more than smelly, trust me. Marauder worthy, his godfather asked with a smirk. Fred and George Weasley worthy, Harry corrected him. I'm saving one for them so they can see a Marauder's handiwork personally. Well, accepting the map, of course. Sirius's smile was proud. I'm very glad that those two found it. They deserved it. Wonder if Filch ever realized the map disappeared, Harry mused. We can ask him later, I'm sure. After we find that dirty rat and clear my name. Sirius was silent for a long moment, then he admitted quietly, I forgot how it feels to be able to walk down the street without worrying. I'm kind of tempted to stay here instead of going back. Harry stared at him, taken aback. Really? His godfather nodded. Quite. Then Sirius frowned, picking up on his godson's side disquiet. Hey, what's wrong? Did I say something? No, well, Harry's voice grew soft, I was thinking the same thing. Sirius smiled bright and wide. Brilliant. Harry laughed. Is that irresponsible of us or what? Our world is being terrorized by Voldemort and all we want to do is sit here and talk about staying. There was nothing but humor in his tone, however, absent of the cool distance that had been his norm since his coming here, and it made Sirius happy. Leg, spying the bandage immediately. What caused this? Trip over your own feet. Piece of metal, the half-truth came easily. Wasn't looking. Huh. Sirius looked at the bandage for a moment more. Think you'll need a tetanus shot. A what? I'm glad you decided to come. I'm too curious for my own good sometimes. Harry admitted with a shamefaced grin. Drives Hermione spare. He had spoken about both of his best friends to Jacen on their way to and from their mission, and Ted about some of his journeys at Hogwarts as well, and the young Jedi had listened interestedly. He was curious about this world of wizards and magic, and he was pleased that Harry had some friends. His childhood, the boy had explained, had been a rather lonely one. Something Jacen had readily understood and sympathized with. Jacen himself wanted to meet Hermione and Ron but doubted that he ever would. How the outlook on our droid? He asked. Harry shrugged. I've just been trying to figure out who it could be manipulating all of this. I dunno. Someone's probably laughing at us right now. Jacen made a face. Probably. They started down the steps and towards the Jedi's speeder. Jacen, Harry. Luke's quiet voice caused them both to turn, Jacen surprised at his uncle's silent approach. And Harry automatically thinking about a certain white-haired wizard and the ability to sneak. The Jedi Master approached them with a mild expression. Master Skywalker. Jacen bowed respectfully. In full Jedi Knight mode, he couldn't afford to be the beloved nephew right now. Not when he was about to show his greatest secret from the Yuuzhan Vong War. Was there something you needed to speak to us about? Not at the moment. Luke spared a small smile in Harry's direction, stopping by Jason's side. Perhaps in a day or so, when the results of that droid comes back. Be home before it turns into tomorrow, Harry. Both young men watched the Grand Master leave in silence for a long moment. Then Harry shook his head. And I was always afraid that Snape could read minds. I think you're paranoid. Do you feel guilty about keeping this from him? There was half a challenge hidden in the lilt of Jason's question, something that the young wizard picked up on immediately. He was checking to see that he hadn't made a mistake trusting in Harry's silence. There was guilt, yes, Luke and Mara had taken him in, after all, and had done so much for him. But he had spent his entire life fending for himself and without the help of adults. He didn't feel like starting now. He shook his head. Jason smiled thinly. Let's go. They headed down into the lower levels of Coruscant, flying in the speed R part of the way and then walking on foot. Harry looked around at his surroundings curiously, having not been around in the substructure since coming through the veil. He remembered crumbling walls overed by yellowed ivy and dying lichen that crunched underfoot. It fairly screamed aliens, and he wondered again at the war that had changed so much. Jason sensed the drift of his thoughts. We thought the Yuuzhan Vong were monsters. And maybe they were, but only because they were led by evil. Seems like they did a lot of damage, Harry commented quietly. 3 times. He really didn't feel too odd admitting that, but he did wonder how Jason would react to it. He knew from reading the chronicles what part the latter had played ending the Yuuzhan Vong invasion, and what that meant to him. For him. Didn't you hate them, Jason? For what they did? Do you hate Voldemort? The quiet counter was unassuming, but it made Harry pause for a moment. For defeat your parents. For torturing you. The last question was a kick in the gut, leaving him floundering for a moment. Since coming to Coruscant, none of the Jedi had ever asked about or mentioned Harry's time spent in the Dark Lord's hands. Few of them truly knew about it in the first place. It was time that added more fuel to the fires of his nightmares. I don't want to defeat anyone, Harry finally said slowly. And abruptly he felt something deep in his gut uncoil. Something that had been stirring uneasily for the past few months, which had finally been assuaged. Even though he hurt you, or defeat your loved ones. There was a definite probing edge to Jason's tone now. The challenge more prominent. It reminded Harry of Luke's lesson of rash anger and its controlling you, but he had begun to grow beyond that stage, and when he replied, it was said with a calmer tone than he would have had a few months ago. I don't want to, he repeated. If it comes down to it, maybe. But I don't want to. They were heading even farther down, deep below the sub-levels and along a lichen-encrusted tunnel that echoed with every step. Harry watched Jason walking sedately down the way and abruptly felt a sense of wariness shiver down his back. The warning of Jason's presence took him aback, but the wary fear was too strong to ignore. His hand automatically tightened around the handle of his wand before he could stop himself. A moment it shook him before he could fully understand it, and suddenly he felt guilty. Jason nodded. If he felt the young wiz's emotion, he didn't say anything about it. Good, he said. The urge to defeat is a highly manipulative emotion. It can easily lead you astray. The urge to hurt can be used against you. So what do you do with that then? That urge to defeat and hurt, I mean. It was not a challenge, just simple curiosity. Jason wished again for Vergier's comforting presence. He missed her, and she would be able to answer Harry's question much better than he. You embrace them and understand them so that when the time comes for defeat and hurting, you aren't hindered by your conscience. Because anger and darkness leads to the dark side. Jason's paraphrasing was not quite snide. He still respected his uncle too much for that. The war with the Yuuzhan Vong taught us a lot, Harry. One such thing is the fact that the Force encompasses both light and dark, and so do we. We can, and we must embrace both in order to reach our full potential. They were nearing the end of the passage, and Jason stopped and turned, sensing the wizard's growing disquiet. You have something dark inside you, Harry. I've felt it. What did you do? Harry was used to the Jedi reading him, but he had not expected that this man would sense that. I saw Sirius fall through the veil, he said quietly. And I thought it had defeat him. I went after the one who had pushed him through, and I hurt her. I wanted to hurt her. Bloodthirst. Jason nodded, understanding. Anakin's death was still painful to recall. as was his intense hatred of the Vong afterwards. There are spells in my world that are called unforgivables. I used the Cruciatus spell. Didn't even think about it. And then you were captured by your Dark Lord. He's insane, Harry stated flatly. Everything he does for pain. They had reached a large pool dug into the cavern floor, so vast and deep Harry almost couldn't fathom it. Filled with frothing yellow liquid. Despite its apparent stillness, there were still undercurrents beneath. That showed something was swimming beneath the surface. And then something rose in to sight, and Harry couldn't help but gasp. It was a giant eye staring back at them. Large thick coils appeared dripping above it as if in greeting, and he heard a low keening moan rise up from the creature's water. Jason smiled. Harry, this is the world brain. Jason and Harry are hiding something. Luke was just finishing up cleaning the dishes from dinner when he spoke aloud his suspicion. He placed his drying towel on the counter and heard his wife snort amusedly. You're only now drawing that conclusion, Skywalker. I knew it from the moment they came back with that thing. Mara was seated at the couch overlooking some information about the latest law Chief Omaz had passed in the Senate. Luke took a seat beside her. They certainly know more than what they're willing to tell us right now. The two of them were headed off somewhere tonight. They seemed rather like they dreaded my presence when I saw them. Can you blame them? You're not the sort of person they would hang out with on a night out. Thanks, he said dryly. She looked up at him with a coy smile. It's all right, sweetheart, she assured him. That just means I get to spend more time with you. The last time you said that, you got pregnant. She cocked her head, shifting so she looked at him fully. And what do you mean by that, Skywalker? I mean we're both too old to be parents again. He ran his hand up and down her thigh for a moment. Still lost in thought. They're secretive. Harry's still not adept enough at hiding his emotions that he can hide guilt. Mara frowned. It was by her own admission that Luck had the better sense of emotion between the two of them, and she knew he was rarely wrong in hunches such as this. Should we watch them, then? See what they're up to? Luke opened his mouth to reply. Yes. It was a young girl standing there looking at him with wide gray eyes. With long dirty blonde hair, long black robes, and a large snowy white bird perched on her shoulder, she made a peculiar sight, and he couldn't help but stare for a moment, taken aback. She smiled. I'm Luna Lovegood, she said in a light, musical voice. As Harry Potter in